Okay, we're just about ready to start here. Please find your seat. Colleagues and friends, please take your seats so we can begin this session. Thank you.
All right, school board members. If everybody can please take a seat. Thank you all. I did a brief check with most people here, and in the essence of time, and to get to what we really need to talk to this afternoon, the ESSER-3 spending funds, I am going to officially close out agenda item 1.02, the final budget review. If you have any questions, concerns, or comments, we can contact Melanie, myself, Stella, Rachna, and we can talk about any changes, additions you want to the final budget review of the FY 2021. So I will now turn the work session over to Ms. Melanie Marin.
Thank you, Ms. Darnett Koufax. Some more money discussions for our board this afternoon. So we're going to hear first an update about the ESSER-3 spending plan, and then we'll kick it off with some board member thoughts, and I'll help us set that up when we get to that point. So is this Mr. Greenfelder or Ms. Burden? Ms. Greenfelder, who's starting? Dr. Brabrand starting.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Ms. Marin. Good to see everybody. Hope you had a nice lunch. And board members, usually I come in for lunch, but I was just busy doing a few other things, so I hope everyone did have a nice lunch. And it's great to have you all here for our second half, where we're really going to talk about ESSER money. And remember, we talked over July again when we had one of our last board meetings. We did end of year money, but we also had a work session where we talked about ESSER. This is a historic amount of federal dollars to come to support our students as we return to school in person. And let me just get right to the, all right, so let me get started here. Am I turning it over completely to Ms. Burden and Mr. Greenfelder and Evangeline and Marty? And we're gonna go through, first really looking at sort of the administration of how the money is set up, the formulas, how we'll monitor it. And then one of the things that board members asked, as we work with schools, how do we make sure there's not just fidelity of implementation, but also accountability? And Mr. Greenfelder has spent a tremendous amount of time working with our principal associations to really get on board with a very strong academic support plan, and with Dr. Boyd and Mr. Greenfelder, a strong wellness support plan. So you'll hear a little bit more about that in sort of the second half. So the first half is going to be focused on the funding and spending, like Ms. Marin said, that we're really focused on, of course, that you have to approve, and the process and monitoring of that money. And then the second part will have what those academic support and wellness support plans look like. those things, again, we can take additional questions today and later. What we're really looking for, though, is to support our overall funding framework so that we can submit this to the state really by the end of this month. So that's going to be the first section of the presentation, and we look forward to your engagement. So I'm going to turn it over, I think, start with Ms. Burden, and then you'll hear from the whole crew up there as well. So Ms. Burden, take it away.
Okay, since Dr. Braburn already went over the agenda, go ahead and move to the next slide. So, as you all know, the ESSER-3 Spending Plan was put forth to you all back in July, and it is based on priorities that were identified through the community engagement process, as well as school board priorities and the leadership identified needs. It requires that the spending plan be identified using 4 major categories, and these are the 4 major categories set forth by the federal government and the state government. Unfinished learning, that's their phrase, but we're calling it learning loss, so we've got both of those here. Then student academic and social, emotional, or mental health needs or wellness for SEL, and then prevention and mitigation strategies and other use of funds. These are the 4 categories and the amount of funding that are projected to be spent in these areas. About 88% on unfinished learning or learning loss and students' academic and wellness needs, with about $23.5 million for other use of funds and prevention and mitigation strategies. The chart on this next page, the spending plan overview, you've seen this before. The last time you saw it, there were only 25 items. There's only been 1 change to this since it was last reviewed by the school board, and that's the addition of item 26, bus driver compensation and stipends. That cost is at $3.3 million, and the number that we reduced was the summer school learning program for next summer, the enhanced program for that, and that was reduced by the $3.3 million in line with the total amount of the grant funding. Mr. Plattenberg is going to talk in just a minute about the transportation program. Anyway, so if the next slide is the 12%, again, 88% is being spent on the first 2 major categories, and 12% is recommended to address prevention and mitigation and other uses such as communication, grant, project management, those and transportation. The prevention and mitigation is for the mitigation measures teams, which Dr. Brabrand spoke a little bit about earlier. That is a external team that we outsource to provide the mitigation support in the schools this school year. And only a very small amount, I think it's $1.4 million, is being spent in this category. And that's because we spent such a large amount of our CARES funds, all of our other funding sources that we had last year on PPE. I can tell you that overall, we ordered 3.3 million masks, including cloth, disposable, shields, everything that we need. 1.1 million of those have been distributed out to schools and departments for their usage, and we have about 2.2 million currently stocked in the warehouse and available for schools and departments as needed. There is no cost for that. We paid for those with grant funds. All the schools and departments had to do is place an order, and they will arrive. So we only have a small amount of funds that are spent on prevention and mitigation. The other use of funds for ESSER-3 in these smaller categories are for communication enhancement, translators, interpreters, multilingual text, phone enhancement, online translation, grants, and of course project administration, technology, including cybersecurity, bandwidth, and Zoom licenses, and then the transportation piece, which is changing the driver base compensation and providing for late run or double run stipends. And Mr. Plattenberg has arrived to be able to talk about that in more detail.
Well, we're just really excited about the opportunity. The late run stipends, really what we talked about, it was $35 per late run as a stipend for our drivers. The increased bus driver pay, we were talking $22.91, which is step 6 on the current scale. It's not only to take existing drivers that are at a rate that's perhaps a little lower than that and bring them up to that base, but also any new drivers. We feel that recruiting incentive will make us competitive for the region, and I think will help us address some of the issues I've been talking about and the school board's been talking about, the community's been talking about, which with our national driver shortage. So those are some of the things we're doing. In addition, we are going to be having, through current operational costs, the ability to go ahead and do $3,000 for existing CDL driver recruitment, and of course the $2,000 bonus that signing bonus that we have, and the other $1,000 referral for recruitment bonuses that we have. So we think that'll make us competitive. We think that that'll help put us in a position, give the respect that we all know our drivers deserve, but also hopefully recruit and address some of the shortages that we've been facing. So we certainly appreciate all the support we've had from you all recommending that we do something and the feedback we've gotten. And that's all I have. Moving it back to Ms. Burden.
Dr. Brabrant, did you want to introduce Evangeline?
Sure. Well, this is someone who needs no introduction. Evangeline Petrich is an amazing executive principal in Region 3 and has been for years and years, but now is coming to us to really become our all things ESSER for our schools and really help make sure that we implement well all of the work around our ESSER spending for both academic and wellness, and I know she'll do a great job. I want to be very clear, we have existing project manager supports through our departments, and Evangeline will work very closely with them as we begin this process, but the board did ask for a more formal project management team, and we are in the process of forming and formalizing that team that not only will be able to help us with ESSER, that will be able to help us even going beyond ESSER with all of the work that we're doing. We don't have all of that team yet together. We do have money in ESSER to build that team. But we've got Evangeline to begin and do the coordinated work with our principals on these plans, and we'll be building out that project management team as quickly as possible, along with all the other things that are going on. But we have the team, we have the money, and Evangeline is here to begin to show you the work that we have done. A lot of work in the last month with principals, a very detailed, very accountable plan that will be able to show the board the work that we're doing and the results based on it. So, Evangeline?
Thank you, Dr. Brabrand. Good afternoon. I'm pleased to be with you all this afternoon and to support FCPS in my new role. For this second half of the presentation, the team and I will share specific details around the spending plan for the academic intervention and the social emotional learning and wellness intervention plan. Next slide. I'll begin with sharing our framework for supporting student success. National studies show it will be necessary to support student academics and social emotional needs as we serve our students in person this year. Next slide. Additionally, national studies also point out that the pandemic has disproportionately impacted certain groups of students more than others. Impacted students are more likely to need additional attention and tutoring services. Next slide. At the division level, we've been proactive, knowing that we will need to address the academic and social emotional learning needs of students. So far, we have developed an integrated ESSER-SIP template that will be used by all schools, and Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 resources and supports to guide schools in the areas of academics and wellness. These resources and supports will be addressed in greater detail during this presentation. Next slide. We also acknowledge that there is additional work that needs to be done in the areas of professional development, the monitoring of student progress, and communication with families. We're going to continue to leverage the use of the multi-tiered systems of support, or MTSS framework, to support our students across the division. As a reminder, MTSS is a framework that provides a coordinated approach to supporting a student's academic, behavioral, and social and emotional needs. High-quality core instruction is the foundation for all students at Tier 1. Tier 2 provides additional supports for some students as needed, and Tier 3 provides intensive support for a few students as needed. We pause here to remember our why. We know that children show up with their whole being. A whole child approach does not separate out children by their academic or their wellness needs. MTSS is a whole child approach, recognizing that our students bring with them assets more than deficits. Student interventions are coordinated, and there is a focus on the strengths and needs of the whole child. At this point, I will turn it over to Mark, who will share information related to the academics and wellness spending.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to go over the academic spending piece, and then we'll turn it over to Noel Clemenco, who will be joining us virtually to go over the specifics around the academic components, and then over to Dr. Boyd, who will go over the wellness components. I do want to, highlight a little bit of what Dr. Brabrand had said. We have spent a great deal of time working directly with our associations, with our principal leaders, and with various principal groups. I can't tell you the number of hours. It's been pretty amazing, and I do want to thank our principal leaders for, with all the things they've had to do and getting school up and running, taking the additional time to really try to make this a collaborative effort and give us their insights into what they feel would be the best strategies and the best ways to spend funding to increase student outcomes in the area of academic and wellness. And so just a huge shout out to all three levels, and the amount of hours they put into this has been extraordinary with everything else going on. So for the spending part, we're going to highlight the wellness part, which is a little over $23 million, and then the academic intervention piece, which is close to $55 million. Next slide, please. So under the academic intervention and support, these are some additional positions that will be added to make sure that we implement and monitor the ESSER funds in the area of academics. You can see the 1.0 position for the executive principal for ESSER-3 administration, which we currently have in place. And then we'll have 5 region resource teachers, which we had discussed previously, and then 2 finance technicians for the accounting piece of this. Those positions, the finance tech and region resource positions, will report to Ms. Petrich and ultimately to the CAO, to Dr. Sloan Presidio. The other piece is the intervention and support stipends, and we'll get into those stipends that are provided to the schools in just a moment. Next slide, please. Then you can see the same thing for the wellness intervention and supports. There are 3 positions: a coordinator, a specialist for the screener, and then a specialist for social emotional learning, and they will report up through to Dr. Boyd in her office in DSS. Next slide. So when we get into the allocations, this is now when we start to get to the breakdown of the funding that the schools would receive. So we talked a little bit previously. There's 2 buckets. There's the academic funding that schools would get and the wellness funding. And it's broken down into the following components. For academics, as you can see, there's a school will get an allocation based on 50% of their enrollment, and then the other 50 is needs-based. So we had to have a needs-based component in there because that is part of the federal guidelines and the state guidelines. It has to be really in tiers. We did run our overall plan by the state. We were the first school division to do so, and they said it was excellent. And I think they actually shared some of that with other folks around. And so we had some folks from our finance office that were instrumental in helping with that and getting that, the state to take a look at that. For the wellness portion, that distribution is going to be all based on per pupil allocation. And you're going to see that breakdown in just a minute. The stipend positions, as we talked last time briefly, there's a $10,000 stipend for the extra duties, and schools are breaking this up into different components depending on the staff that are utilizing, that they're able to hire to help do this extra work. There's quite a bit of tracking. Obviously, this is a federal grant. We heard the board loud and clear about monitoring and oversight and taking great care of this money, and we want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence in that so we can give you all the information that you need in the breakdown. And so we have really designed on the back end a high quality and I think user-friendly application where Ms. Petrich and her team will evaluate what the principals put in, how they're going to allocate their spending, and then we can give periodic updates to the board on exactly how that money is being spent, what types of results we're getting, and then whether we need to make real-time changes in those allocations and what we're doing. So in addition to the $10,000 stipend for wellness and academics, the middle schools and high schools got a 0.17 release period for each, which they've already built into their master schedules. That was a great relief to them and was extremely helpful for some of their staff. And then for elementary schools, since they obviously don't have that setup where we can do that, they were getting 3 hours per week in each area at pay band 15 to pay folks to do extra and beyond in addition to the stipend. So again, that was all very appreciated and already being put to good use in many of the schools. Next slide. So when I talked previously about the academic piece, 50% being based on student population, and then the other piece being based on demographic factors, you can see what we used in the formula was free and reduced meals, English learners, students with disabilities, reading and math inverse index, which is basically their SOL scores from 2019 and this year. We had to use multiple factors, and again, this is not an exact science. There's a lot of different ways you could do this, and that's why we ran it by the state to get their input. And then for high schools, we used GCI. And so it really did have a very wide variety of factors that allowed us to differentiate for schools, and it was shared with our principals, again, extensively, and tremendous support from them about how the money was determined to go out. Oh, I'm sorry, GCI is Graduate Composite Index. I apologize. That's our graduation rate index for our high schools. I apologize for using an abbreviation. I should know better. Next slide. So this is a range. We did not have the individual school allocations. Schools have been clamoring for that. We told them we absolutely had to hold off on that until we had this board's approval. But we did want to provide a range of what that is. So for elementary schools, we wanted to assure even a small school with not a lot of demographic challenges at least got a base amount of money. You can't do a whole lot with $10,000, let's be real. So we wanted to make sure the minimum was 50 for all schools to get something that was adequate and would be able to have an impact in their buildings. And then it ranges all the way up to $189,000 for elementary schools, which we have some very large elementary schools, as you well know. Middle schools, you can see the bottom number is 69, and that goes up to 298. And then high schools is 105 as a base, going up to 366. So that's really the range of schools that's in there, and clearly our most diverse and some of our most academically challenged schools and schools with the most need are absolutely getting the most money. But yet our schools that may not have quite as much need are still getting something significant to be able to do good work with. Next slide, please. Wellness is a little more straightforward. It's much more of a per pupil allocation. It's a straight per pupil allocation, $37 per pupil. And you can see the range there is anywhere from 12 to 41 for elementary, 28 to 72 for middle, and then 63 to 108 for high school. We also wanted to ensure that our centers and alternative schools were getting something, and so we went in and made sure that they're not only getting the per pupil allocation for wellness allocation, but they absolutely have an allocation. It's a little bit different formula for those schools for the academic piece, but I can assure you that all of those schools are getting support, and we have actually met individually with each one of those principals to ensure they're getting what they need. Next slide, please. So this is kind of the biggie. This is what we worked, the next two slides, probably the most with our principals on. And we wanted to make sure that principals had the flexibility to do the work that they needed in our different schools, but also that it wasn't, total free reign, right? It needed to make sure, we wanted to make sure that the majority of the money went to direct services and supports for students. That's what this is intended for. And we wanted to make sure that it was aligned with research best practices that we all know, and we based some of this spending guidelines on our Project Momentum model, which we know has been successful in the past. So the main components that they can spend money on are their tutoring support, both internal FCPS staff, and as you know, we're working on a RFP for outside sources, and hopefully that will be completed soon, and then so they'll be able to use their funding for that. Hourly funding for teachers and other staff to work directly with students after school and individually and in small groups outside of tutoring. For professional development that is directly attributed to improving student support. So it's not just a general catch-all for professional development. It is for professional development that we know is needed for these specific activities. When practicable, we've allowed them to use it for extra collaboration time. So some schools, by adding a little bit of triple T into the master schedule at the elementary level or something else, that was a big ask by the elementary principals. They could then add an opportunity for their teachers to come together, to be able to look at data, to be able to help group students and provide some of that individual and small group instruction. This came up earlier. We want to allow them to rehire monitors to cover classes and teachers, so teachers can provide intervention. So that's a biggie. And also family engagement to ensure that our families can come in and access those activities and supports through that office. And then any materials and programs to support student learning on mental health. And then on the following page, a few more. Again, additional instruction for students, hands-on. This is really for our CTE students. We wanted to make sure that principals had the discretion to use some funding for that. Providing additional hourly support for our family liaisons. We know that was a big ask from our high schools. And then also additional hours for some of our non-contracted family liaisons, so if they needed to expand that. Additional classes to support small group instruction, so that was at both middle school and high school, principals wanting to, hey, can I add an extra section of math supports for my most needy math students, and basically having the staffing and the funding to do that. And then, of course, transportation for any before or after schools and Saturday schools. And we know how challenged we are with transportation, what a great job our drivers are already doing. So that's not going to be something that is going to be wholesale in the county. We're going to try to do it where we can and work closely with transportation to make that happen. And then the catch-all is other activities approved by the region office and Ms. Petrich. And I think the important thing here is this is a pretty broad group of categories, but I also want everyone to know that each one of these schools is going to have to create a detailed plan that is costed out, that will keep track of where the money is going, who it's going to. It has to be approved by the region office and by Ms. Petrich. My office will be involved, so we are making sure that there's accountability, it's done with fidelity, and that we are really looking closely at these plans to make sure that we're taking care of this money and it's going to the right places. Then we will work with Ms. Petrich, and she'll highlight this a little bit later, to have a monitoring system where we will bring schools in, we will review those things, and we will bring that information to the board and share where the money is going, what it's being used for and what the results are. We want to be very accountable to you all for this. We heard that loud and clear in the last meeting, and I believe it's hard to see it in this because it's on the back end. It's in the actual report that the principals will have to do, but that accountability is there and it will be provided to you. So with that, I want to turn it back over to Evangeline.
Mark shared a little bit about the monitoring and the process, so I just want to touch on that just a little bit more. So I will share the process for schools to create and submit their ESSER-SIP templates and some of the monitoring measures. As mentioned earlier, all of our schools will be using an ESSER-SIP template, and so regions will be hosting opportunities to provide training on the template, as well as opportunities for school leaders to share ideas of how they are tying their academic and wellness strategies specifically to their spending plans. The deadline for submission to the region offices is September 30th, and the regions and I will collaborate to review schools' plans. Once approved, the funds will be transferred to the schools, and the at-a-glance, as has been done in years past, will be posted to school websites. Next slide. This slide shows the four-step process we're encouraging schools to use to develop their academic and wellness strategies and actions. This process essentially guides schools to engage with stakeholders to review their data, interpret the data, determine strategies and actions, and finally draft a budget using ESSER funds to support the strategies and actions. Quarterly monitoring meetings will be in place in collaboration with the region offices to review, reflect, and adjust school plans. Additionally, as Mark mentioned, the integrated template will allow us to provide division-level reports of how our schools are spending their allocations. At this time, I will turn the presentation over to our colleague, Noelle Klemenko, who is joining us virtually so that she can share details of our academic support plan.
So good afternoon, everyone. As this presentation progresses, we are providing you more and more detail about how the ESSER-3 funds will be used at the school level to provide direct support to students, especially those that have been disproportionately impacted academically or social emotionally during this pandemic. As you've heard, the schools will be allocated funds and they will create those local plans with approval at the central level. But we want to take just a few minutes to do a high level about what might that look like. So what kinds of academic supports are we talking about? So I'll take a few minutes to talk about academics, and then Dr. Boyd will talk about wellness plans. So our academic support plan is really based on the data. Now, Evangeline talked about the national data, and I think we all know that our data in Fairfax resembles the national data in that we have significantly decreased performance from pre-pandemic levels, and more significantly in math than in language arts, and that we have some subgroups, namely our Hispanic, our English learners, and our economically disadvantaged students who have been more impacted by the last 18 months. So with that said, we wanted to create a plan with a specific outcome of ensuring that all students receive the supports necessary to make sufficient progress to be on grade level in English, language arts, and mathematics. So that is our overall goal that we are striving for. And the schools will be creating plans that really leverage the research and evidence-based strategies you see here on the slides. MTSS, that was described earlier, really ensuring we have that very strong Tier 1 instruction for all students, and then the more intense instruction for those students in need. Extended learning time. One of the things we know students missed out on was time during this pandemic. So where can we find extra time after school, on weekends, during the school day to provide extended learning time for students? High dosage tutoring is one of the things that you'll see in research time and time again. When we can provide small group instruction to 1 to 3 students at a time that really is tied to the classroom content, we can make a significant growth with those students. And finally, we will always lean on and leverage our professional learning communities and our collaborative team structures, because those will not only help us to identify students who are in need of Tier 2 and Tier 3, but they will allow us to keep a constant contact on what is happening with students throughout the year. So as the academic support plans are developed, there are responsibilities at the division level as well as the school level. Some of the division level actions are already well underway, including us taking the last several months to work side by side with teachers to ensure that our curriculums have been updated to really address the learning loss or the missed opportunities for learning that have occurred over the last 18 months. So our teachers and our students are now currently engaged in updated curriculum guides. Then we also have been taking time to ensure that our Tier 2 and Tier 3 are really ready to address the needs that are going to be more profound than we've seen in the past, especially for our English learners, our students with disabilities, and our economically disadvantaged students. And then finally, preparing to ensure that schools have the supports they need to have high-functioning MTSS structures in their school building through professional learning and coaching. The schools also are, obviously our partners in this, and they have the actions of their own. If we'll go to the next slide. And those actions are really the implementation of so much of what I've already spoken of, ensuring that the MTSS practices are in place so that they can quickly identify students and provide the interventions, leveraging those collaborative teams in Tier 2 and Tier 3 so that we can accelerate learning both during the school day and outside the school day, and always keeping parents in the loop, communicating student progress towards those grade level goals. Now, it's important if we're going to have an outcome and we're going to have actions, how we'll be measuring. And those things are going to come in SOL scores, IEP goals, iReady, grades, report cards. I do have to say, none of this will be fast, right? We took 18 months of time to create our current state, and it will take time to make up for that learning loss. But we do believe that with intentional actions and more time for learning, we will be able to accelerate those results. So just to bear with me for a minute as we go to the next slide, and forgive the small print on here. I'm certainly not going to read everything that's here, but I wanted to share the framework. So you'll notice down the left-hand side, the Tier 2 and Tier 3. So how will schools actually do this? What will this look like? How will students be identified? So going across the columns at the top, we wanted to lay out some very clear screening criteria for schools. How do you first decide who are the students who are in most need of these interventions? Then next, once you have identified that screening pool, you usually need to do additional assessments, some formative assessments to really target what exactly did students need. So we have a list of things that are already in place. It is our goal to try and leverage things that schools already have and already know, and just refine our guidance and our criteria as to not overwhelm them as they are taking on this new work. And then interventions, like what might those groupings look like? And they can come in lots of different ways. Again, they can be during the school day, they can be small group, they can be individualized, and they are sometimes going to be supported just by the classroom teacher. And other times ESSER funds might be used to hire an interventionist or a tutor. So those are ways in which schools might spend some of their money. The resources that we're providing are different things that we already have or that we're refining in order to really be as grab and go ready for the teachers and specialists that may be working with the students. And of course, as you are doing interventions, it's critical that you're progress monitoring to ensure that the intervention is actually have the intended impact. And if not, a change could be made. This particular chart you'll see is for elementary math, but we have created them for secondary math. And if you go to the next slide, we're also in the process of really building out these same types of charts for English language arts, really just ensuring that teachers have what they need to understand who the students are, what exactly they need, and have some really strong resources in order to start providing these interventions as soon as possible. So I'm going to turn this over at this point to my colleague, Dr. Boyd. I believe if you go to the next slide, we're ready to transition to wellness.
Thank you, Ms. Clemenco, and good afternoon. As Ms. Clemenco just talked about the academic intervention plan and plans to increase student achievement, we are going to have a similar chat about how we would address wellness. Because she unpacked the pieces so effectively, I will try not to be repetitive in order to afford you all with some additional time for feedback and questions. So as we move to the next slide, before we begin to describe our wellness plan, we first want to talk about the why around we do wellness in FCPS. In FCPS, we're committed to growing together and ensuring that each student is met by name and by need. While many of our students that participated in our ORSI survey in last spring indicated that they felt like they belong and feel connected to school, this slide shows, and the next few slides show that there remains a need to be committed in fostering student wellness and the importance of social emotional learning. More specifically, we have concerns that we want to address through wellness around students of levels of stress, the ability to have a trusted adult at school, and students feeling like they belong at school. As we look further into the reported levels of stress on the next slide, it's noted that stress increases for students as they matriculate through school. More specifically, our middle school students report higher levels of stress than our elementary, and our high school students report higher levels of stress than our middle school students. When we look at another indicator that highlights the need to be intentional about our support for student wellness is students' responses to having a trusted adult at school that they can talk to about a personal problem. If you look at the information, the participants, based on the participants that participated in the study, 20% of those participants did not feel like they had a trusted adult at school. Beyond that overall response, we can also see that there were differential perceptions from students based on racial and ethnic groups. These points inform us around who is not yet experiencing support and belonging in our school community. We know that there are more assets a person can identify, and the more resilient students will be to cope with change. Finally, 11% of participants in that study indicated a lack of overall sense of belonging. This is a key data point, as feelings of belonging, again, are assets that assist people in building resiliency, and we've had a focus on resiliency for some time. Now that we know the why behind why wellness is important, let's quickly look at what our wellness plan is. Our overall goal for our wellness plan is to ensure that all students, and I have to emphasize all, feel safe, included, and supported in school. As my colleagues mentioned earlier, MTSS is the framework, and that's multi-tiered systems of support, is the framework that we're going to use to provide tiered, specific interventions for students based on their individualized needs. Social emotional learning programs, more specifically, help students with wellness and have been found to have a positive impact on a number of student variables such as attitude, relationships, and academic performance. Relationships is also something that the research indicates is a strong impact and influence on learning and on development. And finally, as we talked about the differential perceptions in our racial or student groups, social emotional learning advances educational equity. As we look further, as Ms. Clemenco indicated, again with wellness, we have division level actions that are identified, and some of those include things such as coaching, supports and resources, professional development, and expanding explicit skills instruction in social emotional learning. Further, we also have specific items and actions that are identified at the school level, and I won't read these to you because some of them are familiar to you, and you can see them on the screen, but they do support things around social emotional learning programs, and again, reiterating that social emotional learning impacts wellness, which impacts achievement. So while we're talking about these two things and we have separate slides, one does influence the other. Here you'll see a variety of data sources that we'll use at the division and the school level to monitor our progress towards our wellness goals and objectives. Examples of those data sources include survey data, attendance data, discipline data, social emotional learning screening data, and other data sources that are identified in schools, ESSER and school improvement plans. And we do want to highlight that we have been fortunate enough to implement that Seo Universal Screener to all of our schools. If you remember when we spoke lastly, it was just going to be 25%, but we are really excited that we're going to be able to do a full implementation of the Seo Screener on this year. Finally, in the same format, you'll see that these charts provide more detailed information for both our community and our staff regarding how we will begin to implement a strong Tier 1 systematic approach to wellness, which includes social and emotional learning, and these strategies will be employed to all students. We also have some information regarding Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions that have been and continue to be available to students. By using our ESSER dollars, we're going to strengthen our Tier 1 practices and focus every school's effort on using those universal approaches. For Tier 2, which is our targeted, and our Tier 3 are intensive supports, those are going to be individualized and driven by data. Please be reminded that there is no one-size-fits-all approach as we provide these tiered interventions. And also please be reminded that the level of support required for students may change over time, and we would hope that it would change over time as we're more effective with the implementation of our strategies. Now that we've outlined our proposal for how we would allocate the plan, the purpose for the funds, the framework that we would use to advance our academic achievement and our wellness goals, we will now share next steps relative to the application. And at this time, I'd like to turn it back over to Evangeline Perkins.
Thank you. That's right. So to wrap up our presentation, the next step for the division is to submit our ESSER-3 spending plan pending board approval to the state by September 1st. Once the state reviews and approves our plan, funds are transferred to FCPS, and subsequently allocations are distributed to schools and departments. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was very comprehensive and answered a lot of questions I know the board had asked previously. So just to get us going here. So again, the goal here is to prepare for Thursday's vote on the ESSER-3 plan, including to consider if any amendments are needed. So on the screen to help us are questions that I shared with the board yesterday to help frame our discussion, to clarify needed information and if any amendments are needed. I do want to just point out two funding-related themes that came across in today's conversation when we were talking about the first day of school and the year-end budget. And those two themes voiced by a lot of the board were the need for support staff and that for that need in lunch, including to monitor outdoor or alternative seating, to mitigate early or late bus arrivals and departures, substitute teachers, bus drivers, and we also could include lunch aides. I would have added that one. But a second theme, in addition to the need for more support staff, was the theme to get students outside. That meant making space accessible to the extent needed, whether that was tents or some other thing, and to make the space comfortable, which means not muddy, which means considering temperature. So those were two funding-related themes from this morning, although we talked about many other things that were not quite funding-related, but operationally related. So what I did suggest, and in the interest of time, since we are running close to meeting the scheduled time, and I know Dr. Anderson and myself need to leave right at 3:30, what I'd invite us to do is to please, we'll each go around and speak to these questions. What are the critical questions that you still need clarity about? Are there amendments that you're thinking about that you'd want to see change? So again, the three questions I'll just read them on the screen are, what are crucial adjustments, if any, that you'd like to see made in this ESSER funding plan? What is not currently budgeted at a level that you think is critical? And what do you request clarity about? So if we please could go around the table, we can all have one turn before some of us depart, and then the conversation can continue with the usual 3 minutes. So I'll just go ahead and start alphabetically with Dr. Anderson, knowing you have a time constraint. So please go ahead, 3 minutes each, please. Thank you.
Marin, can I offer a suggestion? Because I know quite a few people have said that there's some concerns with doing this format.
Actually, it was 2 people, but yes,
Okay.
go ahead.
I've had a few more people reach out. So the only reason I ask is, for those who have time constraints, I think we would all be amenable to allowing them to go first, and then we can have our normal process discussion, only because I know that as we speak and discuss, we kind of build some of these questions and the
Yes.
understanding,
So as one of the people who's leaving early, I would be part of that, but I really feel discounted when my suggestion on how to facilitate the committee that I chair is pushed back so harshly. To that point, the last budget meeting we had, I spoke well after 2 hours into the budget session. That is not a fair turn for someone who is waiting an hour or 2 hours to speak and be heard. I think it's within reason to ask that we go around and share our thoughts on where things stand, and then we can continue the discussion. If we proceed as you are suggesting, Ms. McCarthy, there's no way I would be done in 30 minutes. So I'd like to proceed with what was suggested, and I'd appreciate if you all could please respect a different approach to our work that could be productive as well.
So I would suggest you go first, since you have the time constraints, but I'm going to let you go around, and if people have anything to share, go ahead. If not, then I think we could proceed our regular process, if that's okay.
And my intention was to try and capture, again, some of the themes to see what could be put forth as an amendment, to use this as an actual working session to create the body of work that would inform our vote on Thursday. So Dr. Anderson, would you like to please go first, and I will follow you given my time constraints. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I do have some questions that I do want to also put out there into the ether, and maybe I'll get a link so I could follow up virtually after I leave here at 3:45. Again, thank you for all the work, but because of lack of time, I'm going to jump into some of my questions to put on your radar. I appreciate the delineation between the wellness and the academic supports. As we've all talked about, this is a lot of money, so people are very concerned. And so I appreciate the ESSER-3 SIP accountability measures that you put forward. I'm going to bucket my comments, I think, in about 3 different areas. So funding. The wellness allocations, and I cannot refer to the page numbers because the slides were not numbered, but it's the one that looks like it has the 2 sections. So sorry, this is like sucking up my time. Oh, are they really tiny? I totally did not see it. Okay, thank you. So this is the one that has slide number 18, where you talked about how funds would be allocated. One of the things that I do want to offer for consideration, we have several schools that have already, before the pandemic, have had significant issues with student behaviors and social emotional issues. One of the schools that comes to mind is Wayne Oak Elementary. Threat assessment numbers are through the roof at that school, more than they are in any other spaces. I wonder if there's some room there for consideration for those schools that had already pretty intensive situations going on, that they be provided a greater allocation, make it a little bit more needs-based in the same way that you are evaluating the academics. So I would like that for consideration. Lots of staffing here will be procured. I noticed there were 8 that will be procured centrally, and obviously schools will also procure staffing, whether temporary or et cetera. Is it expected that all of these staff members that will be procured will end when the funds expire? I'm seeing a yes by by Mark there. Thank you. You also talked about input. Appreciate that you've talked about with the associations and the principals, which is wonderful. But if I believe correctly, Mr. Smith, all of the association membership and principals, that amounts to 30% of our workforce. How do we receive input from the other 70% of our workforce? Talking about the wellness piece, one of the pieces that I know several board members have been talked to from the folks who do CALM and the mindfulness work. How is that being inserted into this? I don't see it as a menu of option for the wellness piece. Is that going to be left up to the school sites to determine? What I also did not see here are communication with parents regarding what is going to be happening at the schools. Not that you can outline this, but what is the expectation that schools will provide to parents?
Dr. Anderson, that is your time.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Okay, I will go ahead and go. So my main, what I really request clarity about, oh, wait for the time clock, please, Ms. Madeja, thank you, this will be my turn. What I really request clarity about is really how the vision comes together in practice, using what we already have that works well by improving where we know we have challenges. So for instance, class size. So when I see a budget item saying we're going to go for out-of-school time supports, because the teacher has, say, 26 or 28 first graders, that seems to me just moving the problem around. We, I think, have become too comfortable staying below our maximum class size amounts as if those class size regulations are a good thing. When children have 28, 29 first graders in their classes in a year, when those kids may have never have stepped foot inside school, having an after-school tutor is not going to help very much. I think there could be a little bit too much literal of an interpretation around how to use these funds and not looking at the bigger picture. We know class size in many schools is an issue. Adding after-school monitors, adding more time for PD, that will help, but reducing the class size will help. And I am really concerned that, I don't know if it's because folks are worried that there's going to be some funding cliff and we've hired these staff and then we have to exit them after, but that in combination with what I've heard from principals, that there just aren't people out there to hire. There aren't classroom monitors. There are not tutors, substitute teachers. You know, what are we doing within the school day that's within our control? I think, you know, looking back at the themes we heard this morning from the board as a whole, the lunch monitors, the lunch aides, what can we do to make that time there beneficial? I mean, I'd be in favor of using some of those funds to pay people more to entice them to come and be in our schools. I think, you know, I really was hoping to see a plan for the outdoor spaces. We discussed that at a previous meeting, and I just would love to see something very sequential. You know, the minimum is an accessible, safe outdoor space, whether it's a tent or a fenced-in area where children won't run and be subject to traffic or whatnot. You know, that's like the minimum to me. I think, you know, this was a budget question I asked previously, question number 28 and 27. 27, I know, was a little bit over the top in terms of what was envisioned for outdoor space, but it doesn't have to be fancy. It has to be safe and functional. Then the next step is the professional development, and I think that PD around outdoor ed can be part of the MTSS approach. And I'm concerned that I don't see it as research-based strategies on connecting nature to overcome trauma and advance academic learning. I don't see that as part of the MTSS. It's going to become one of those extra things. So I really, that, and then getting back to more support in the schools, the T-specs, the SBITs, I'm hearing that these folks are overloaded. So however we can interpret ESSER to meet those needs during the school day is what I'd love to see more of. Thank you. Next, alphabetically, would be Ms. Cohen.
Thank you. I had a few questions. One of them is when we talk about the bus driver shortage. It seems like in Fairfax County, we've sort of created a farm team for every other county, and we help people get their CDLs, and then they go to places that pay them more money. So my worry, I love the 2291, but I'm really worried about step increases. So I'd like to know what's happening with that. The 2291, I think Mr. Plattenberg said, is commensurate with a step 6 right now. So I just want to make sure that we don't get in a place where if you have 5 years experience or 6 years experience, you're making a nickel more than somebody with no experience. So I want to make sure that we're valuing that, and that the step increase piece is also in line with the other counties, so we don't wind up just losing people after, you know, a few years because they can do better somewhere else. I wanted to ask too about translators and interpreters. How many, I see we're using 12% roughly for all of these things. So how many translators will that translate to? Sorry, guys. And some schools are already using, I know, their own money this year because they've seen it as such a deficit. So is that something that then we're going to be reimbursing them if they've already brought a translator into their school? Another one, definitely, I totally agree with the monitors piece and the outdoor. I just would like to see more of a very, explicit conversation about it. I see rehire monitors, so that's great, except this says to cover classes while teacher provide intervention. So this still is not speaking to the piece of physically monitoring someone while these kids are spread out, hopefully, all over the outside eating lunch. So that, I would like to see that better addressed, I know, along with my colleagues. And in terms of major themes for me, that's really it. I would like to see in the wellness intervention and support. I understand these 1.0 positions are more sort of oversight, but I guess, I'd love to see is the idea that we start here and expand, because I think of like one specialist for cell in elementary with 156 elementary schools, 159. Like, what is one person possibly doing with that? If it needs to be one per region, then let's do it right. If it's not, then let's not. So I think a little more information on some of those positions would be super helpful to me. So thanks. Like Tammy, I will cede my very generous 17 seconds back to somebody else.
Woohoo. We have Ms. Corbett Sanders, please.
Thank you, and I'm glad to follow up on a couple of different things. I had mentioned about the compression in the pay scale for bus drivers, and I fully support Ms. Cohen's advocacy to address the higher level steps in that area. Secondly, I very much appreciate your structured approach to how you're going to scaffold from the classroom all the way up to central office in the oversight of this project management. I'm a little concerned that we are not being specific enough in a rubric to be given to each school of what is expected, because what we are really looking at is a migration towards an individualized education plan for all students to meet them where they are. And so I would like to have us be more specific in that rubric. And as part of that rubric to each of the schools, something that is missing in this plan, and it's something that this board has talked about extensively, is a very focused and intentional approach to literacy, because we know that that is something that's important here. We know that this plan does address the math deficits, but the literacy piece is a key part. And along those lines, I'm a little concerned at the very low threshold we've set for identifying students for interventions, because I think it's in the 30s, 39%, and that is certainly lower than we'd expect. On social emotional, I would support, once again, being more intentional about what we're looking for from our schools to support students in social emotional, including what we offered last year, which was a consultation to families that need it. And my last piece is on the social emotional and the academic well-being. We know kids do better when they are outside in their learning experiences, that it contributes to their social emotional health, and it also it contributes to their academic success. And so I would like to have a portion of this coming to us on Thursday night that is very specific on that outdoor piece, including hiring monitors as necessary. And one of the things that I said earlier today was have a standard kit, which is the minimum. Let's define what that minimum is and make sure that there is funding for all schools to be able to achieve that minimum. And then from there, build upward. And then, let's see, the other piece that I just want to encourage is that we have a very clearly defined process for monitoring success and intervening when individual schools are not achieving that success. And I'll give my 10, 8, 7, 6 seconds
Wow,
back.
we're pretty good at this. We're pretty good at this. Next, we have Mr. Frisch and then Ms. Keys-Gamarra.
Thanks. I have a couple questions about some of the other numbers in here. How was the figure for summer school 22 arrived at, and do we have the opportunity to recover ESSER funds if we don't spend what we anticipate like we did this year?
Yes, that number is soft. We, this year, of course, will inform what the program for next summer will look like, and so we won't know. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot I wasn't supposed to answer questions.
Well, it's okay. Please continue. Ms. Burden.
That's it.
Okay. I also had questions around the difference between ESSER-3 management and the grants administration. One is for $2 million, one is for $530,000. They sound similar to me. I imagine there is a difference. I believe so. I think Dr. Anderson mentioned needs-based assessments on SEL. I thought that was an interesting idea. I'd love to hear that thought through a little bit. I'm interested in the bandwidth and licensing figure for our Zoom contract and whether that is more than might be necessary, given that we're almost entirely back to everybody in the building. And maybe that already reflects it, but that'd be good to know. And then also would like to see the rehiring of monitors broadened out a little bit. And within academic intervention, I'd hope to see a little bit more about perhaps some funding for around our goals for structured literacy. So I would love to have a conversation around that as well. And I will give back a minute and 15.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Frisch. Ms. Keys-Gamarra, followed by Ms. McLaughlin.
So before I ask my questions, because they are questions, Ms. Pekarsky, can we get some clarification? It seems that we're only giving our statements right now, and I personally benefit from hearing responses from staff and then kind of building on that. So I want to ask my questions as questions and have a discussion, but I don't, I'm trying to figure out how to go forward. I initially understood that you were saying that those people who had to leave, and this isn't part of my time, those people who had to leave would go for first, but moving forward, I would like to be able to have a discussion as we normally do. So if I could get some clarification, thank you.
Well, I'm happy to weigh in. The vision here was to do what we have done in previous work sessions when we are before a budget vote, which is to go around and see where everyone stands on things. The discussion that you're describing, in my experience sitting here in the budget seat, that doesn't happen. Because when some of our members don't get to speak for an hour and a half to 2 hours into a meeting, that's not really a discussion. So what I'm capturing here is, and I'm going to have to leave soon, but already we've gone through half the board and we've stated where people are at with this proposal.
Yes, but we're also not getting response from staff.
But we will, and taking the temperature first around, which has worked in previous amendments, it has worked well. If you want to list through all of your questions, I will write them all down and they can get answered. I'm not trying to stronghand this, folks. If, I really would just appreciate at this point just the collegiality of going with someone else's leadership style. That would be a good lesson for the board to try.
Ms. Keys-Gamarra, so I would suggest at this late hour, we finish your, if you want to skip, I would skip as soon as we wrap this up, going around, we hear from staff, and then we go back and people ask their questions. And I, as do you, also benefit from a discussion type. This is difficult for me, but I think we're in the middle of it. Let's just finish it up, and then we can go back to the questions, I think.
For the record, Ms. Marin, since we didn't have a lot of discussion about how we were going to structure this, that's the reason that I'm speaking up. So I am going to allow those who choose to follow this program, your suggestion, I'll allow them to go forward so that I can feel that I am fully representing my constituents in a way that I'm comfortable. Thank you.
Thank you for allowing my facilitation to proceed. And to clarify again, the vision is once we go around once, then we open it up as we usually do. So Ms. McLaughlin, if you wish to go, please do.
Absolutely. Let me see how I can capture this best to my colleagues. And Dr. Brabrand, I'm sitting here in shock. A month ago, when the board went out to recess, you were very collegial in saying you understood that it would be hard for us to pass an ESSER plan with a list. And the list is, I believe, slide 615, where there's 26 line items that add up to $180.6 million. This PowerPoint slide doesn't provide, at least for me, exactly what I thought we were going to get a month later. Could we pull up slide 16 or 15, please? Because I'd really like to demonstrate where my concern is for my colleagues. There is no way I'm voting for this on Thursday, and here's why. At some point, this board has got to demonstrate where we stand on our fiduciary responsibility. This information we have here before us is very interesting. Some of it's helpful. But when you look at slide 15, staff clearly put a lot of time and effort to develop it because it's down to almost the dollar amount per line item. You can't come up with those amounts if you don't have the homework behind it that says it's going to cost this many tens of millions of dollars, or you know, take any one of those line items. Number 9, academic supports, $54.9 million. Or take line number 16, indirect cost recovery rate at 1%, and you're down to $616. So look at that column. I just want to know, if you have those dollar amounts, what are the calculations to get to that dollar amount? Because my job as a board member is to represent the community, the constituency, and to provide the oversight. I'm not any more clear on that. When you then look at the information we received on positions, there was 11 positions listed in this PowerPoint, no costs associated with it. You could be deciding to pay someone $500,000 for their annual salary. I wouldn't know it because it's not there. So in my time, I hope this is helpful to our budget chair and vice chair, but really to our board as a whole. This is not a surprise. I said this and multiple board members said it a month ago, and I'm at a loss. So I would look forward to staff being able to explain to me, unless you can get me by Thursday, a breakout of every one of those 26 line items on how you even came to that dollar amount per line item, so then I at least know how you plan to spend this money. Because I agree with your values. I agree with your focus areas. But 4 buckets at the beginning of the PowerPoint slide for $108 million, 26 items in a line item listing, that's not enough for me to put, you know, my leadership reputation on the line and vote for it. So I do hope my colleagues, well, you guys have drilled down to some important topics at the macro level. I think if we put this out to the public and we told them that that alone was how we approved it, I wonder what our role really is. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. Ms. Amish, followed by Ms. Pekarsky.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. I am happy to follow some of what Ms. McLaughlin said. I think there are 2 conversations we're having here. I mean, one is accountability around specifically the academic and wellness pieces that was requested after the July or during the July work session, and the second is preparing for Thursday. I think I'd like to indulge our meeting managers in discussing what to prepare for Thursday, although I do wonder if it's possible to potentially suspend approval, but the problem is our timeline doesn't allow us, right? I mean, Thursday is our last chance here to approve this, so I mean, we're in a corner, clearly, but in terms of the pieces in preparing for Thursday, I'm happy to see that we arrived at the fact that 10K wasn't going to be enough for schools, and I'm happy to see that reflected. Thinking big picture here, what has changed in the allocations since our last conversation, just in terms of the broad big picture line items? I don't see any significant adjustments and just want to confirm.
I would say, Ms. Burton, the biggest allocation line item was the adding of the bus driver compensation stipends at the end.
Right.
And I think what Ms. McLaughlin, I guess maybe I'll stop and wait. I think what she's saying is that chart, wanting it annotated to explain the numbers and positions behind the aggregate number. Not that you don't dislike the documentation we have on our academic and wellness plans, but how do the numbers add up to that? That's part of its formula, and part of it is just simply cybersecurity is 3 positions or a contract for this or whatever.
And I think the academic and wellness components, right? Because that's what we recognized in July, that there are massive amounts of money. We know that there has to be rigorous accountability on the school-based level. And I think that hasn't been effectively fleshed out today, but that's something we can continue to work on. That money is just there. And to her point, I mean, if it's delineated so specifically to the dollar amount, right? How do we then only have kind of broad criteria as to what's happening? It seems that there's been more work done behind the scenes to where that specific money is. But that's not exactly preparing us for Thursday, so, I mean, I recall, emphasizing, for example, focusing on school-based funding rather than big picture. We still have, have we, just a question truly and sincerely, Ms. Petrich, congratulations on, your work and what you're doing. Is she the executive principal that's being proposed before us today to approve on Thursday? I'm sorry.
No. That's a separate process. We've hired she is the executive principal
For ESSER.
hired for ESSER administration.
But that's on this list for us to vote on Thursday, right?
Well, the position is being funded through ESSER money. Yes, and we have moved her into that position.
It's on the slide.
Yeah.
This is, okay, so I don't understand how we're approving that after the position has been made, or hired. And the other piece is, the 5 region resource teachers, right? We talked about how we want to emphasize school-based funding. This is the same. This is exactly the same as what, I just don't see how, what I'm going to say right now is different than what I said in July. I talked about English language learners, right? It's a glaring gap.
I think something missing, and Mr. Greenfield, did you want to add something before I made some comments?
I did, just on a few of the positions, including Dr. Petrich's, and I apologize for not saying doctor before, I should have remembered, is that at the previous board meeting, it was voted on that we could hire those specific positions that we needed to move forward, and this was one of those particular positions that was essential. That was in the last board meeting, and that's why we proceeded around a few of the positions. It was only, I think, 3 or 4 of the positions. I just wanted to make sure everybody remembered that.
No, I appreciate that. Did that include, because we had a conversation about decentralizing a little bit, right? So that wouldn't have included the resource teachers. Our chair would have known, so can I have some clarification? We didn't specify, I remember that vote. It was like everyone was ready to go and we just made it happen. Yeah, can we have some clarity on what exactly?
Okay, can you just ask your question and then we can capture it?
That's my question. What exactly did we approve in terms of positions? It was a broad vote.
Okay, well, Mr. Greenfelder just referred to it.
Yeah, it was a broad vote. The things that were necessary operationally, bare minimum, we can pull up the actual, words of what we approved, so we can share that.
I think it was
Right.
time sensitive was the
It was,
language.
maybe it was time sensitive.
Right.
yeah.
And I do recall that, and the
Yeah.
language wasn't specified, right? So these other positions wouldn't fall under that? Is that what
We haven't hired most of these positions, okay? We've hired her, we agreed with parent liaisons and a couple of other of those coordinator positions, those 5 positions by region. We haven't even finished hiring them. Guys, we're in a pandemic. We had a massive amount of money. We've had a deadline trying to spend it, and we're trying to do it with as much transparency as possible. And we have a deadline for the state. So I don't know, I'm sure we can get there between now and Thursday. This team has worked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to bring you our best thinking. If you have better thinking about how to do it, but I'll be honest, it's formula-driven. You've seen those charts for social, emotional, and academic. Exactly what the interventions will be, the measures will be, and the schools do get a menu of some things to decide. We've not told every school 2 tutors for you for reading, 2 tutors for math. We've not done that. We've told them, go to look at your data, and by the end of September in your school improvement plan, you'll come up with these parameters of the menu to choose what works, and then you'll be monitored and held accountable. That is empowering our schools to do the work closest to the student and then hold them accountable. Holding me accountable is everything you asked me to do in July's thing, I've done. Our team has done it and prepared and brought back 99.5% of our kids in person with minimal operational impact. And I need some help this year from this board to support this team in the hard work they're doing, because it is exhausting. It is exhausting for us to come and feel like the hard work we've done is nothing but mediocrity. Okay? I'm just being honest with you. I want this team to succeed. I want this board to succeed. But it just is constant. Nothing seems to be enough. It's not intentional on our part. And maybe, as Ms. Marin said, we've got to come up with better feedback mechanisms to do it. But it's constant with every single thing we bring. Somehow it just doesn't measure up. And it's a very frustrating way to want to operate. And I think we all want to operate at a higher level of performance. And I'm looking forward as we reconvene under this board's new leadership to find ways to make these work sessions not go on so long, not have board members argue over the right way to even run the meeting. We've got to get to a better place for this system, for this board, for the leadership team, and for the future superintendent you will hire. And I'm sorry to say it, but I need to say it, and I need to say it now as we restart this year. We need to find a better way to have more productive meetings that get the decisions made that need to be made to support our kids and staff and our entire community. I'm willing to be held accountable, and I want to do that. We did the preview today at the direction of the chair. Some didn't like that. I can't have 12 ways of being judged. Judge me as a board with what you want, and I'll do my best to do it. Thank you.
Dr. Brabrand, I think we need to get back to our established procedure to make it through this first round and get back to some of the questions, as there are many questions, I think, still that have not been answered.
Well, with that, I think we should take a 5-minute break and regroup. I know I need to exit, and I will turn it over to my vice chair, who I will leave it in her capable hands to continue my vision for this meeting, which was to have us be on a productive way. But after let's break till 3:35, and then after that, it will be Ms. Pekarsky, followed by Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
I'd like to finish my time.
No, I'm sorry, the clock hadn't stopped. It stopped and you had gone over quite a bit. So please, let's adjourn for 35, 4 minutes now, please. Thank you.
Board members, if we could get back to the table, please.
All right, I mean, I hear what you. I think part of, I think.
All right, board members, thank you so much for, we will be continuing this work session. So at this point in time, I would like to, if everybody could just put down their placards right now so I know that. And what I would like to do, because Melanie did not leave me the list. If anyone would like to make a comment in the format that we were following, please raise your hand right now. Otherwise, what we will begin to do is we will answer the questions that are before us for the people who did ask questions while they were making comments. And then we will go back, and then everybody can put your placard up. And this is the time where we will go back to the way we did it this morning. We will have 3 minutes to ask your questions, and the staff will answer appropriately at that time. So would anybody like to make a general statement? Yes. Go ahead, Ms. Tolan. Thank you.
So the general statement I wanted to make was, just listening to everyone, I feel like, we all came in today with some short-term issues and problems that we've heard about, having just been out in schools and having, kids start yesterday, things around, of course, buses that were late, the need to get kids outside, class sizes, big issue. Those are short-term things that need to be looked at and taken care of, like, right now. And then in addition to it, now we're here today talking about this ESSER-3 money, which is money that we are spending over at least 3 years, correct me if I'm wrong with that time frame, where we need to look at sort of how is this being allocated, what direction have we been able to give schools, what can we submit on September 1st, as how specific can we get with that plan by September 1st, and then what monitoring do we have in place as schools are taking this money and using it. And as we get data, we're talking about, I was pretty impressed with October being the first time that we would get some data back already from some of this stuff. We're then going to need to really look at the data and say, is this working? Is it not working? Okay, now we need to move things around a little bit. And that I envision being a continuous process over the next 3 years. So I hope people can kind of keep that in mind as we're talking today and thinking about this maybe in sort of 2 buckets. And the short-term stuff, although we may spend ESSER funding for it, it's a short-term thing, but then we have this big long-term report and issue. Just a framework.
Thank you. And Ms. Sizemore-Heiser?
Thank you, and I won't take too much of time, but I think part of the struggle here is that the timeline for the federal and state government and the timeline for our students getting back and reassessing and knowing, and the schools knowing, here's where we need to take our academic bucket, I'm going to call it for a shorthand, or our social emotional bucket, and really target it because our assessments are showing X, Y, and Z for our students. And I feel like that may be where some of this tension is lying, where we rightfully want to know, because this is a huge sum of money that we're overseeing, what are we doing with this with specificity? Where is it going? Who are we hiring? What's their position? How does that relate to these goals that you have laid out for us? And we should have that information, but I think to some ways it's hard to have it until we get our students back and assess them and see, here's what we need to target, here's what this position is going to do, here's what we need. And to some level, that's a school level information that then feeds up to the RAS and comes to us. So I think maybe that's where we're encountering some of these issues. I don't know what to do with that, but I just wanted to put that out there for my colleagues' thoughts. So thank you.
All right, Ms. Cohen.
I guess too, I just wanted to say we sort of perpetually as a board, I think, have hammered home that we need oversight and we need like specific people to oversee massive things, right? It feels like every time we have these big conversations, we're pointing the finger and yelling at Scott and saying, well, who's in charge? And he says, I'm in charge. And we say, no, like who's specifically in charge of this specific thing? And now with $200 million on the line, I think the goal in many of these positions is to have that project management that we can keep talking about so that every piece of this is implemented, big, huge piece, Evangeline, you know, each region piece, the RAS person. And then these specific things, having some people who are making sure, because we talk about a lot here, how things don't trickle down in the way that they're intended to, mostly because we're so big. But I think this is the first time where we're seeing like real structure, and unfortunately that costs money, and it's central office positions, which is never sexy because it is often so hard to equate who is this person that makes $100,000 sitting in Gatehouse. How does that help my kid? And I totally recognize that's attention. It is historically attention. I absolutely understand it. But to me, just looking at this and the narrative, if you haven't had a chance to read it, and I know it was a lot late, but the narrative is super good and really specific. Not dollar amount, to Ms. McLaughlin's point. I'm not going to argue with you at all about that. But very specific about goals and how it's supposed to go in and all of that. So I respect that everyone feels a lot of pressure. That's a good thing, to make sure that we are being super accountable and have really good oversight of $200 million worth of taxpayer money. But I think we kind of have gotten off the rails a little bit, so maybe I appreciate Mr. Annette Koufax trying to bring us back here.
Thank you. And so I think 9 of us have made comments, 3 of us have not. So those 3, that would be Ms. Keys-Gamarra, myself, and Ms. Pekarsky. We will have 3 minutes when we talk the next time, and other board members, the rest of you will have 2. And what we will do now is we will kind of read through here. You will read with me collectively to catch questions, and we will see staff answer them. So Dr. Anderson, it looks, oh, she's gone. So let's see, communication with parents regarding what is happening at the schools. Maybe you can speak to that, Scott.
Yeah, you know, one of the things I'm thinking about, we already with our school improvement plan have to post that information publicly, we share it. And I think, Evangeline, you know, I see you nodding your head. We simply can do that and make sure extra clear that it needs to go out to our community here when those plans are complete at the end of September, so people can know exactly what that means for their schools. They already need to do that with our $3 billion operating budget. You combine the ESSER spending with the school improvement process for our normal operating funds and explain what those additional funds are and make sure that principals make it intentional. So I think we could do that, Evangeline, don't you agree?
That is correct. We intended to use the traditional posting of the at a glance and adapt that to the ESSER SIP template for our schools. However, the posting probably would not occur until the plans are approved by the region, so it would be sometime after September, but certainly before funds are dispersed to schools.
So probably October is likely, sometime in October, and maybe we can figure out and tell the board when we could expect the deadline. We could tell principals to have it all posted by. The other, with discipline issues, I think what I heard Dr. Anderson saying there, and again, I don't apologize for my passion today, but I do want to know that I do want to continue to collaborate with you all and know we can figure out how to get through this together, working together. I think what Dr. Anderson is wondering is, we had a needs-based allocation piece for the academic. Could we add one in based on some sort of measure? And I don't know what it would be. She's suggesting discipline, maybe it's attendance. I don't know, Dr. Boyd, what your thoughts are about that. I don't think we know yet, and maybe that's why we didn't do it, but maybe there is some data that we could look at. Your thoughts are helpful.
Yes, we can certainly look at that. To your point, we didn't initially do it because this will be the first time that we have universal, sorry, I have to grab my mask. My apologies. Nobody gave me an elbow or anything.
You're good, Dr. Boyd, you're good.
Now I lost my train of thought. So, because this will be the first time that we have universal screening data to be able to see where those peaks are. But certainly there are certain data points that Dr. Anderson mentioned, like discipline, attendance is another one that we could look at to see, to be able to weight, if you will, or use a weighted formula to disperse those SEL.
Back at discipline and attendance, we're going to do the screener in Dr. Boyd's leadership. One game changer from a month ago, like she said, a nugget, we were going to just screen 25 schools. We're going to screen every school. I wonder whether we could consider whether we just leave the distribution or we leave a reserve in schools that come out higher in the screener data, we send more money to. There's two different approaches. One is look at past data, and one is look at the screener that we're going to do in the next month, and then hold back and have a level 2 allocation. I don't know, board members can think about that either way. And Mark and Dr. Boyd, Mr. Greenfelder and Dr. Boyd and other members of the team may have different advice, but we definitely hear that. We could do something on that. I think that's not a problem at all.
And Dr. Braybrand, if I could just add, as far as parent involvement or community involvement with these plans, I just want to remind the board and everyone that in our regular school improvement plans development, that is developed by a team of people at the school that represents several stakeholders to include teachers and parents. And so we expect that the development of the ESSER and the school improvement plan goals will also include a team, a representative of the school.
Thank you, Dr. Ivy. So those are those two. Let's go down to the Ms. Marin's. I see a lot of comments, not real questions here as scribed. Translators and interpreters, is there any plans, I guess, want to see more? That's her comment. And the class size. I think the class size a lot of people are concerned about, and that's...
So class size, there's a couple of things there, and Mr. Smith, jump in here if you want to after I say. We still kept our class size regulations that included what Dr. Garza had brought, which was those enhanced dollars and our staffing reserve for schools that went above the class size. And there is a trigger. Maybe what I hear you saying is a little more advocacy. Could we be a little more lenient in our operating budget around those numbers? Or I hear you advocating, could we take us a bit of money out of ESSER? We've struggled, and again, I heard some board members say, are we being too narrow? But we're trying to stay on the right side of the feds, not to blend or supplant ESSER money meant for kids who returned in the pandemic and are in school from kids that didn't, which is more enrollment based. And our staffing is enrollment based, the kids that are in school. And is there a way to be more flexible with our existing staffing procedures versus taking money out of ESSER per se to change class size? ESSER wasn't passed to be a class size reduction fund as much as it was to do interventions directly with kids. But maybe we can go back and, I don't know, Mr. Smith, any comments? Maybe, Ms. Tolan, if we looked at what some of those schools are that we think are on the line, we could go back through our regular HR staffing review and see, we have a special needs column as one of the areas, and see what those are. Mr. Smith?
Well, and we do know that those conversations happen on a regular basis during our regular staffing meetings, and so our HR staff, along with our finance staff and our regions, work very closely with schools and look at them with an individual lens about what's best for them. I know I've been in several meetings here lately where we have provided additional staffing to schools based on those unique needs. And so we would always encourage our principals to reach out to their region staff so that we can have those discussions as part of the regular staffing process. And you're looking at me like, well, that's not exactly what I wanted to hear, but thank you. And again, it's important for us to use our regular processes because we do have, there are funds available within our current budget structure to provide some of that staffing when we have the rationale behind it. And we certainly wouldn't want to provide additional staffing to classes because there can be a lot of reasons why, for optics sake, when we have certain schools that have much smaller class sizes than others, then we would have to try to explain that. So we do look at it independently and individually with our schools and our principals.
Thank you. So we will go to I think the way I should continue to do this, Ms. Cohen, can you pull out your questions there as far as what during your comment section?
I mean, less pontification, more actual question. Step increases. I know, did we lose? No, Mr. Plattenberg, we did.
This would be 2 minutes. Ms. Cohen's questions.
So the real quick thing is, what we're saying is, we would be willing to go back and relook at all the rest of the scale and do that market study in the next month or two, and then bring a permanent solution, right? The Band-Aid is raising the floor.
Understand what we're doing.
Do a review, market review. We think we can get it done in just a couple of months and have it to you. What do you think, Mr. Smith? By December, we could have it, and then you all could decide to act looking at maybe existing dollars from our first quarter review if we want to make a change, or put it in the budget for next year and have a permanent solution. We know some may want to do it this year, and we're not saying that we can't make that tweak during the year, but we don't want to, we're nervous about making a change to salary scale without doing the complete review, because other employee groups will say, hey, wait a second, what about the process for us? So I don't know, Mr. Smith, anything else there?
And we're currently engaged in that process and have planned to bring that to the board this fall. It was a follow-on from last year, and so we are actively engaged in that currently.
So that's on that one. And the PD around outdoor education, I don't know. Would I defer that, Noel, Ms. Klemenko rather? Do you want to say anything about professional development that we have been doing around education, outdoor education, excuse me?
Absolutely. So we have done some of that through our Get to Green, and we do know that we have had partners reach out to us to offer to do more professional development around that. Certainly, this is something that a school could choose to do with their funds, as long as they could make the tie to this, to direct support for students to improve academic or wellness outcomes. So I do think that does fall under the list of acceptable uses, as long as that tie can be made.
The other thing I saw in there too, I think you had one about monitors. Monitors, we've heard that from several board members. If that's something that we want to look in ESSER to pull down a little bit, probably of summer school, that you heard Ms. Burden say was softer number, and have a discrete monitor, and I see some nods, but a discrete monitor category that we could have for you on Thursday to vote on and pass, and know that those funds are specifically to support classroom or outdoor monitors, I'm sure we can do that. We will do that if this board consensus today to do that. Be glad to do it.
Yeah, I think, do you want us to give you a thumbs up if there's?
I'd love a thumbs up to know whether to do that or leave summer. That looks like a lot of thumbs up, but I'm not sharing this meeting.
Mr. Arnett Kopex, do you mind counting us?
For a monitor pullout in the aggregate, lowering a little bit of summer school and having a specific discrete amount for monitors to support outdoor.
Who's feeling good about this right now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay.
That's helpful. Thank you.
And then the last thing I was asking, translators and interpreters, working with schools who already threw that into their budget this year. is there a way that ESSER is used to help either?
Now, I want to say we gave money for parent liaisons already. And by the way, we're looking at renaming parent liaisons to family liaisons to go with a broader, and parent was a word we've heard from. I know,
Much
well, we are trying to listen and do some feedback there. So we are going to be renaming them family. We did give those schools, we already green-lighted some additional dollars to those schools already this past month because as the parents were returning. But Marty, didn't we have something else on here with interpreters in this?
Dr. Brabrand.
Dr. Williams can answer
Dr.
that.
Williams,
Yeah.
thank you. Dr. Williams, there you are, I'm sorry.
No worries. There is a set aside in the central allocation in that list, in a preceding slide that outlines funds that we have for both translators and interpreters from the central level. But I think the other piece to bear in mind is that as schools go through that needs assessment process, they should be making requests for additional supports as needed, because we know that our students for whom English is not the first language will likely have experienced more impacts. That's what the national data shows. So when we start to look at what schools submit, we should see that kind of pattern and consistency.
So I know we have at least one in Region 4 of a principal that used some of their discretionary money to hire a translator because translation services is so overwhelmed. And it was just a really big need at that school. You guys will work with those principals. If someone brought them in trying to use their discretionary money,
Yeah.
we can help
Yes.
those principals out, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And I think something that I've heard from a few other board members, perhaps when we talk about the school allocation, Mr. Greenfelder, how we can help schools say, look, things like English language supports or even special ed supports, direct services to kids need to be directly informed, which I think we've said, directly informed by the data that they've just gotten back. And that schools that have a mismatch, if their plan is talking about, I need to help my AAP kids, but the data shows, as it is showing in our division, that our English language learners, our Hispanic students are behind, we need to see a lot of the ESSER plan at the school level that gets approved be directly for those kids in need based on their SOL and other data performance. Mr. Greenfelder?
So I would say on the back end, the process that Dr. Petrich and the RAS and the data team has built has more accountability and structure like that than I've ever seen that we've ever had before. And I think it's hard to explain that because you can't really see it because it's built in this live portal and we're still putting the finishing touches on it. But I can assure you it is down to the exact dollar, to the exact strategy, and it actually does a calculation to show what percentage of the funds are being used in certain areas. And so there will be a lot of accountability in that, and it will also have to flow as a double check, not only through the regions, but through Dr. Petrich, and our office will help Dr. Petrich as well. So there's going to be a lot of eyes on it to make sure. I did have one follow-up question from the, I'm trying to state this correctly, from the finance perspective of the line item on the monitors, is where that would come from. So the only thing is if you pulled it out of the school allocation, it would reduce their overall allocation. If you pulled it out of like summer school, for example, that would be different. So they were just curious on.
I think they
was
were
curious
thinking
as well.
summer school. That's what I said
That's
when
what
I
I
said
thought.
it was a soft number, so not to
Yep.
take away from schools' already distributed formulas, but a separate line.
Because that's a big
item.
difference in what schools would get. I just wanted to highlight that, that's all.
Yeah, the other question, I appreciate the accountability piece, but I just want to make sure that we are offering like the support and guidance. Then if we're putting a lot of emphasis on family engagement, awesome. But we got to tell them how to do it, because it's amazing when you talk to principals and you say, wow, at Braddock Elementary School, they realize that they have a ton of kids, a ton of parents who are not literate in their native language. And so they weren't getting any of the parent communications because they couldn't read it. And so they totally restructured and wound up doing videos and doing voicemails in that language. And the principal I was talking to was like, oh my God, like I never even thought about that. And so how can we do it? So I just want, accountability is great, but not so great if there is not a framework and shared resources, not just in the principal's corner, because I don't know how people find a damn thing in there. I just like, how do we get them this information?
I'd like Dr. Williams to respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, that question is really important because accountability without support is a setup for ineffective practice, right? And so we have been, as we've been making these allotments of resources for family involvement specialists, having those conversations in tandem with thinking about how we provide supports, because some schools are going to have a family involvement staff person and they've never had that position before. So the idea that they will intuitively know what to do is very different than someone who needs additional support and can go much deeper. So we're creating a responsive framework to support that work as we're making the allocation of those resources. So we hear that.
And one follow-up, regions have already begun to create structures to bring schools and pyramids together, to share what their plans are developed, how they're best utilizing their resources, and to share common practices. So that's another outcropping of this that's going to help us get better through a collective effort of sharing. And Dr. Petrich already has 5 sessions scheduled to bring schools together around these areas as well. So you're going to see a lot more collaborative efforts to share those things and do exactly what you're just talking about.
Awesome, thank you. And I'll yield my 30 seconds back.
Thank you. I need 3 minutes on the clock this time. Thank you, because I'm going to go to Ms. Keys-Gamarra, who's not yet spoken.
Thank you. I appreciate this opportunity. I wanted to state overall, my concern is the recognition that we know not all schools are starting in the same place, right? Like, we know that some schools, as Dr. Anderson said, may have been having huge discipline problems, or they may have not been able to provide access to higher math. We have some regions where we don't have advanced academic centers. And so, you know, I think that as we look at these ESSER funds and we talk about the loss of learning, we have to figure out what the starting point is. And so I'm concerned about inequitable outcomes. And so part of what I'm looking for, which I know in the amount of time that we've had, we probably haven't been able to do it, but at some point we've got to hear from our schools saying, this is our greatest need. We just haven't had the resources. We've had to focus on this deficit. We've had to focus on English as ELL students. We've had such significant needs here that we haven't been able to get to certain places. So if I could just hear, I think the community needs to hear some of this, which is part of the reason I wanted to have feedback as to how we're going to bridge those gaps, right? Because I'd like to see, that's where we need to start, in my view. Anybody?
I think one of the things, thank you so much, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, for that question. One of the things that I think is going to be key is understanding that the numbers won't look the same, because our baseline, we're starting at a different place. So it's really a focus on progress as opposed to the number. If I have, 100 kids that have, chronic absenteeism concerns, you can't expect for my overall school chronic absenteeism to be the same as a school who only started with 1 or 2. So we really have to look at progress and look at that baseline data. So that gives us really a reinforcement that when we're sharing the data with you, we need to make sure that you have that full context so that you can see progress as opposed to just seeing a number in isolation. So that's just one of the things that I wanted to put in response to your question, but certainly my colleagues may have additional information they wish to add.
Well, I can jump in as well, because I think there are a couple of ways that we can look at the issue, right? And given the tenor of our discussion today and the urgency, one part of my answer won't be satisfactory, because a part of it is we're going to have to figure it out over time. We're on day 2 back to school, and while certainly people who've been working with students have a sense of the ways in which students are struggling, I suspect they will continue to learn more as the weeks unfold. And so this question of what has been the disproportionate impact in the many manifestations that we are likely to see given the data, I think that part of it is unknown, right? And we have to have a process that is responsive enough to let people adjust when those things make themselves known, and that we codify it, and that there's accountability, and that we storytell. So that is the work from my perspective in moving forward. that we tried to structure a process that would allow us to do. I think what we know, and so for those of us who are going to be litigating to a degree these data in terms of plans that get approved, we know that there are things that we should look for. The COVID pandemic was a pandemic that exacerbated inequities. So what that means for me is everything that you already knew about who was struggling, you should anticipate that that only got worse for many of those communities. And so we should have a sense of, which populations schools should be planning for, which communities schools should be thinking about. And the other piece that has come up here, which makes this work even more complicated, is that not all schools are spatially oriented in equal ways that even allow the kinds of access to recovery that we would want to see in terms of outdoor education, environmental education, and just being connected in a different way, right? And so there is all of this complexity that deals with what we knew and how those conditions might be exacerbated, and then the things that unfold as we continue to do the work of recovery. But again, our attempt was to develop a process that would allow us to respond to storytell and report as we move forward.
So I think what you're saying, I'd like to restate it to make sure I understand. And that is that, one, you are going to be hearing the stories of our individual schools and what their experiences have been. But also in providing this plan, it's sort of like, okay, if you're a school that has high social emotional learning issues and hasn't had access to higher math, here's our plans for both of them, and we'll help you figure out how to implement that.
Right.
Am I hearing that
That's
correctly?
exactly right.
Okay, all right, so I'll move on to my next point.
Okay.
Thank you.
You
Did anybody else want to, I'm sorry to handle that.
Ms. Keys-Gamarra, I would just say your question is exactly why it was developed. You couldn't have phrased it better, is exactly why the process is developed and the flexibility is there. So a school with those needs can shift the funds and resources as approved by the region to take care of those specific needs to affect. So how you stated it is perfect, and why we are building it in that way so that schools and communities can build the resources to help kids that reflect their community and their specific needs. That's a really critical piece.
And Ms. Keys-Gamarra, only thing I would add to is it's the check. It's not just that the principal comes up with it. We're going to check to be sure that they've, right, like you said, here are the two things you should do if your populations are this and this with this issue. Well, you need to have this in your plan, and if you don't, Evangeline and the RAS go back and go back to square one and bring me a plan that addresses it. We're saying that to principals up front, right? But I think that's your piece too, to check. As the data comes in and they review it, it needs to match with what they're deciding to actually spend on this menu of ESSER options, what they're actually going to spend the money on.
But that's both the project management piece and the transparency piece as far as I'm seeing it, because the community then has an idea of, oh, this is why they're proceeding at our school in this particular way. This is what's been projected, and I then also have an opportunity to give input to that, which to me is bringing about wholeness in our community.
One silver lining of this pandemic, I think the school improvement plan, which is going to be combined with ESSER, is going to get more attention than it's ever had before in our community. I'm just being real. It's always been there, but it's just been part of the business as usual. And now I think there's going to be a lot more interest, involvement, feedback, and that's ultimately a good thing for accountability in our schools. But again, 15 years ago as a principal, I posted those, and guess how many emails I got? 0. We're in a different place and a different time. And I think the pandemic is elevating, that's the good news story out of this. It is elevating accountability across this country, and it's going to elevate the accountability of these SIPs in a way. Again, we've been doing them. I think we've done them well, but people haven't paid attention to them or reacted to them at the level that I think they will this year.
So I had other comments, but I have 34 seconds. I want to go to page 35, where it talks about the preliminary data review, where we already know that different students report different experiences. And we also know that research has shown that different groups even felt more comfortable out of our schools. And so I'd like to know how we're going to incorporate that information into these ESSER plans.
Can I just qualify the second part? I understand different kids have different experiences, but then you said out of our schools? I missed the second part.
What I'm saying is there was a study reported on NPR that said Hispanics, African Americans, and Asians we're choosing virtual at a much higher rate than their counterparts. There are some underlying feelings as to why that's happening. If we're not addressing that and they're just walking into our schools, that doesn't spell success to me.
Got it, got it. And Dr. Williams, we have been talking about capturing those kind of trends based on the feedback that our principals working with those communities are hearing, so that we think about how we're going to restructure our in-person environment, right? What are the reasons people were hesitant to return? And maybe we can work on capturing some of those themes and share it with the board. I don't know, Dr. Williams, you want to add to that?
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I just put something in my mouth, so I'll try to manage this. But, I mean, our attention to social emotional learning in those conditions that bond and attach students to one another and to the classroom, that's an attempt to, number one, surface those types of issues and then work on the kinds of collectivity and belonging that we know is critically important. We started this work in a really direct way last year, looking at the issue of belonging. The other piece that I think that I would lift it up, and I'm looking at Dr. Boyd, because I'm thinking about morning meetings and the requirement that all schools are holding time to have those opportunities where we actually create community. And if there are issues of exclusion, if there are issues of marginalization or undervaluing, that's the time to really engage in that identity affirming culture building that actually interrupts those patterns that would make it easier for me to be at home than to be at school. So those are my thoughts about two direct things that we're doing to address those findings.
So I just want to say I appreciate the information with respect to the bus, Dr. Brabrand, and also I think it something else. I'm sorry, my time is gone. I'll use it. I'll come back in my 2 minutes. Thank you, Ms. Derenak Kofax, and I think Ms. Omesh. I didn't know if she had wanted to speak or not. Thank you.
Thank you. The other person that has not spoken outside myself is Ms. Pekarsky, so I'm going to go to her next, and then we will go to the questions beginning with Mr. Frisch's section next.
Well, it's been quite the... Okay.
Ms. Pekarsky is next, and then we will go to Ms. Corbett Sanders' questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm going to be pretty fast because I will say candidly, when this came out at 8 p.m. last night, I did not get to look at it, and I just need time, and it's been a little bit chaotic here today, and I think maybe that's a conversation we can have about, you know, when we set up meeting managers meetings, that this happens in a timely way, and if people cannot do it, then we may have to just switch out people. Availability, I think, is important because I don't think it's fair to the board, you know, last minute like this, and it's definitely not best thinking. But anyway, having said that, some really high-level things. I think it's obvious that there's been a lot of work done on this, and I really appreciate that you did take the feedback from where we were in June, July at this point, you know, our concerns about the accountability piece, getting, you know, an executive principal to move up and oversee. I think that is going to be helpful to the board. And as we, you know, go through this year and this gets spent and put in place, that we maybe get, I don't know, quarterly updates. You know, I think that's something that we need to talk about, that just so we can have some of these accountability measures into place and really see how is this, you know, affecting what we want to affect. You know, I had questions around the bus salaries, which I think you addressed when I actually stepped out. I am concerned when I look at this, and I think it was brought up, excuse me that I, you know, was gone for a while, but we want to make sure that principals and teachers get the support they need to be successful and be able to put some of these things in place, and it's not just a punitive kind of you know, because at the end of the day, we're just focused on making sure kids get what they need and that individualized approach, and I think that is the most important thing at this point in time. So candidly, I'm a little bit worried about that just because it's a lot. So I don't know that we can do anything, but I think it's something that we're definitely going to have to consider and think about. I did have questions about the outdoor learning spaces and where that fits in to the overall plan. I was worried, and again, I didn't look at it in detail the way I'd like to, but I wanted to ensure that our identification on that MTSS, pyramid, that we are really, we start very broad with where we set our cutoffs. And then as we go down, we can, whittle it down and really assess kids. But I want to make sure that we're not starting from such a low point that it's, we miss all these kids at the top, that we're just assuming our, tier 1. And I think you want to say something, Dr. Bridge?
Yeah, you're back on that chart where we showed
Yes.
what our cutoffs would be academically.
Yes.
Is that right? And we're going to, it's a little bit of our best thinking, and we're
Okay.
going to have to look at where the numbers go and then react based on those numbers. But Evangeline, I know what they're talking about, those cutoffs that we have for the thresholds to determine whether
39%.
kids academic. Yep.
The 39%. It's
Yep.
just, again, let's be really broad and then kind of whittle that down to make sure we're not missing anybody. Besides that, I agree with where the big buckets seem to be, that we're putting them, oh, am I gone over? Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Corbett Sanders, from your comments up there, where are your questions?
Yes, thank you. First, on the bus driver, I know that what we have in the numbers is the budget, the bonus structure that was sent out last week, but Mr. Plattenberg mentioned that there's a $3,000 bonus. So the question is, do we have to modify that?
That bonus Mr. Plattenberg was referring to, he has in his own operating budget to do.
So he has the extra 1,000.
He has the extra 1,000 in his budget. The line item here, and I think one of the things, Ms. Burden, taking Ms. McLaughlin's feedback to heart, is that slide, whatever number it is, that's the 26, to annotate a little bit more detail to describe each of those. Cybersecurity is 3 positions, or a contract for $50,000 for monitoring, whatever it is. We can do that. And on the bus driver, that bus driver amount is to raise the minimum to step 6 for all of our 325 bus drivers who have paid below what we now know competing folks are. And we are beginning, and we'll complete in the next 1 to 2 months, the market study for the rest of the scale and bring recommendations to the board to potentially act on this year for the rest of that budget, bus driver scale.
So the presumption is you'll actually footnote it so it clarifies that it's 3,000 for the CDL, 2,000, so it differentiates. And the second part of that footnote will be a explanation of other work being done, or somehow sending that message would be great. The next piece, which is the rubric and the structured approach, I see that each of the regions will have a plan. I would just ask that the regional assistant superintendents and somebody from your shop actually sits down with each of the board members so that they are fully aware of the specifics for those regions and how they will be executed. And I would also suggest that we need a follow-on motion on Thursday night that would require a quarterly update to this board on where we are on achieving these metrics and any sort of changes we might need, so that we have that specificity and that clarity of actually putting into place and executing real project management skills. And then finally, I would like some numbers put in this to specifically address the outdoor learning spaces and eating outside. So if we could have a minimum number per school on that, that would be great. And the rest of that, I think we already talked about the monitors. So could somebody give me a number by Thursday night on how we address the outdoor space?
Yes, we're working on it. But back to the 3,000. We're just doing 2,000, but if your end is approved, then those folks will get an additional 1,000, right? You're not talking about changing.
She's just saying to explain it so that people can connect the dots like we did today with the board, so that that bus drivers or the public could go, wow, between this and this, you'd be able to get this much.
And the 3,000 is for people with existing CDL licensure.
Right.
So I can give you the language for that so we can articulate it.
My only reasoning for this, Ms. Burden, is it's a public relations piece, but it also shows that we are matching we're exceeding what others are doing. So it allows us to attract people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get it. It's ESSER dollars plus our operating dollars puts us in the same competitive advantage as the other districts. And we just need to put it there so that people don't think, looking just at ESSER, oh, it's not even the same amount. Why would the board do that? I got it.
And it also helps us, frankly, send a message
Mm-hmm.
to the community.
I do want to be clear, because I think Ms. Keys-Gamarra said it too, and maybe Ms. Cohen, and now you have. Look, we absolutely agree quarterly is more than fine. Now, some data will have quarterly, and some data may have to come at the semester, depending on, the fall. So I'm just saying, some data based on when it's assessed, we may not have all the pieces quarterly, but what we can have, that frequency will provide, what we have at the semester will provide, end of semester grades. So we'll have a lot of data. Remember, this is the first year we'll have a complete discipline referral system, universal system to be able to collect discipline data. So we're going to be able to have a lot more data tools. SOLs, remember, there'll be fall SOLs. We're still working with the state to see how that will be reported out. So we'll be able to share some of that with you as well. But a quarterly arrangement for the board to review is very reasonable, and we're in support of whatever the board deems necessary through feedback or follow on to do something like that.
Thank you. Mr. Frisch, yours are in question form, so you can go through those.
All right. Such an odd way of doing this. All right, so we already talked about the first question. The second question was related to the difference between ESSER-3 management and the grants administration on the list of line items. They sound very similar. I was just interested to know what the difference is.
So Lee, I'm going to, as you're thinking about it, the translation of Carl's question to me is, we have the 1% indirect costs. Who's that going to? What's that going to? We're also hiring that project management group. We've hired the executive principal for ESSER administration, but we're going to hire that project management team. How's that project management team line item different from the 1% indirect cost?
Not entirely.
Right? No?
There's a line item for $2 million for ESSER-3 management and $530,000 for grants administration.
Oh, I see.
Grants management is funded for fiscal '23 and '24, and it's 3 positions in the Title I office, which does the ESSER grant management. Fiscal '22 is not included because that was funded with ESSER-2. So it's only the 2 years, and it's 3 positions each. And it's for the Title I office, who is doing a lot of the heavy work as far as grant management for all of the ESSER grants. And then indirect cost recovery is a state-authorized indirect rate of 1%. That's the lowest you can go. It's allowable under the terms and conditions of the grant, and it's to offset the costs, the day-to-day overhead costs to manage the operations of FCPS, like payroll, procurement, HR, utilities, and that comes into the school operating fund as an offset. So there's not actual expenditures that are identified there, but it's for all 3 years. It's about $600,000. So that's why it's 1.9.
So this much money for the impact on this part, and yeah, okay.
Exactly.
And then 25 is your last one. Is that right, Carl? Mr. Frisch? The 1.9 million for the project management.
Right.
Right, and that's 5 positions for project management, a project manager, not Evangeline.
It's a project manager, an administrative assistant, 2 project management specialists, and a data specialist. And those would be the individuals who would be pulling together information for the quarterly reports that you've all talked about, who will be working to manage the overall project. Currently, we have a variety of ad hoc project teams that have come together to get us to where we are today. And so while those teams will be in place, they have day jobs. This group will be responsible specifically for managing the regular operations of the ESSER grant.
And we are looking at, to be honest, in all candor, that this beginning with ESSER creates this division-wide project management group that we keep beyond the administration of this gap to do project management, across departments. Because we've had board members say, well, you have project management expertise in a department, but you need cross-department project manager leadership. So this lets us get that going. We can evaluate how well that is, and I think I think it's been loud and clear. Part of the feedback is we want that to become part of the culture in the system across departments, just not within. And so that's what that team would do.
Okay. Am I allowed to ask things that are not on the board? Okay, just checking. So in terms of, when we talk about the fall SOLs, we've been talking about the growth measurements, that's right? The fall SOLs? Yes. Yeah, okay. And when do we anticipate we'll have information back on those?
Noel, the fall SOLs, when do we think we'll have results from the fall SOLs? I don't know whether we know that or not, but I'll see whether you do.
I do not believe we have a date when we would have that information back, but we can check in with our Office of Testing to see if they have more information that we're not aware of.
Okay.
But I know that the window probably doesn't close until sometime in October. So it's probably going to be after that point, is my guess.
For academic intervention, we've talked a bit about structured literacy over the last year. Do you anticipate that we'll be able to make inroads using ESSER funds as part of our academic intervention on structured literacy?
Noel can really speak to this, but we have a massive plan for structured literacy. We have a work session plan with you all on that in September through the chair's leadership, Chairperson Pekarsky. And so I don't know, Noel, anything else you'd want to add around that right now? Do we
So I
need
guess I would
ESSER
add,
funds?
just to clarify that the work session is in October. But we'll be really looking forward to sharing. The work is already underway. We aren't using ESSER-3 funds. We are using some department carryover funds. And the line item in the end of the year to replenish the basal resource adoption is we're engaging in a basal resource adoption process this year. So those funds will be incredibly helpful as we look to buy a large purchase for our early literacy in July. But the work is already underway, and so though we have not named anything in ESSER-3, we'll be excited to share what we are doing using existing funds and carry forward funds.
All right. And then finally, we've been talking about the incentives that we're offering for new bus drivers quite a bit. What's the interest been like? Have we been seeing an uptick in interest from folks in the positions?
Mr. Planberg?
Excuse me, in working with HR and also the Office of Communications, we've actually ramped up and done some pretty amazing different aspects of trying to recruit and engage people into our program. So we've seen an increase in the number of people that have been responding to and coming through our application process. We really feel that the one thing that we're hearing overall is that we've got to be competitive with the surrounding jurisdiction. We can't be getting as far behind as we were. And we really feel these measures are going to really put a good shot in the arm, if you will, for our whole program.
Great. I mean, that's the first step, right, is getting initial interest from people. So, and then finally, I'm grateful that there's board consensus on having a line item there for monitors, however they might need to be used throughout the day. Thanks.
Mr. Frisch, getting back to your question, I just got confirmation. We should get preliminary SOL data probably the second week in November, and then final official SOL data from the window the first week in December. That's from the state.
You know what, though? You know, Mark, that preliminary then, that can be a nice part for our quarterly report, right?
Yeah, we
at
can
the
make
quarter
that.
November, and we can plan for a quarterly report in November that has the SOL data included,
We will make
along
sure
with all
it's-
the other data.
We'll make sure it's updated.
All right, thank you. So if we could move that up so I could see whose questions are next. Ms. Omesh. You have 2 minutes to ask those questions
May I
there.
interrupt first? I'm really trying to understand.
Oh, I'm
How do I
sorry,
not-
it was me, McLaughlin. You're next, then Ms. Umesh. Do you need clarity on, you can ask, look at your comments that you made there, ask questions, and you have 2 minutes to ask your questions.
Yeah, as a follow-up, because Dr. Braybrand didn't have a chance to really answer it, I would like to just understand first, what exactly did you all submit to the state and in order for them to look at your report? I know they can't, we have to still approve it on Thursday.
Right, we haven't submitted anything
You
to the
had to have
state yet,
this-
as
but the-
best
but
I
the-
understand. I think we posted some information,
Yes,
but
the-
we haven't submitted yet, have we, Ms. Burden?
No, as I understood it, August 1st was you had to post.
Right.
And what was raved about by your team was how much it was so well-liked that it's been shared with other districts. So that's great.
It was just-
Although, again, my question is, wanting to see just show me what you submitted. Number two, more importantly, our CFO had to clearly get some documents from your team in order for her to create slide 15.
Right, you want the
So I wanna
annotated
see-
detail
I wanna
behind that.
see the-
Yep,
I
I
wanna
got
see
that.
that
No,
on
you and
there.
I dialogued after you were passionate, I was passionate, we had a
Uh.
passionate agreement that you want some annotation to that chart in more detail, so it's super clear. How does that add up to that number for those categories? Ms.
And-
Burden?
Yeah, you can look back through your email, because on July the 15th, based on your request, I sent you all a spreadsheet of each line item, what department was responsible for it, a paragraph of the description of said item, and then by fiscal year, how many positions and the dollar amounts associated in those 3 years with that line item. So you could look at that. It's not correct now because we've just made a couple of changes with bus transportation and reducing summer school. So that gives you a high-level paragraph about each one of these. In addition, we're developing right now an annotated sheet of everything on the list of 26 with classroom monitors. That'll now be another change. And we will hopefully get that out to you all tomorrow.
So Megan, let me just, you and me for a minute. We should have just planned, I should have planned as superintendent to just have updated that and had this in the packet today. Even if we had presented it before, but a month ago is a year ago, and you guys get 5,000 other things, and just had it updated to explain a description of what it is, and then what are the elements that add up to get us that number for transparency. That was the point I know you were making to me earlier.
And I'm glad you told me to come and look in your direction, so I'll keep my comments to your direction.
No.
Respectfully, that was not presented to the board. So I appreciate that Ms. Burden's saying that exists. The board went on its summer 1-month recess on July 16th. So we can't know and the public can't know if these documents aren't there. So at a minimum, what I would request, again, going forward, is whenever your team has developed any documents of any kind related to work we're doing, it needs to be reposted. It needs to be on all one place. And, again, I'll look forward to reviewing that, but this is where the disconnect happens, because there's too many times where we'll ask for stuff, and then I know something was said, oh, well, we answered that later on. When we ask for stuff, and it's coming in a different manner, in a different avenue, that makes it really difficult for us to even know where it is, where to find it, and when it ever got done. So I think there are some tracking things
Okay.
we still struggle
We
with.
can look at that. Ms. Burden, any
Yeah.
other comments there?
Just one more thing. We did post, as required, on the FCPS website, the ESSER plan on August 1st. But it's a really high level. It was a dictated format, and so it's more narrative, less detail. And that was posted on August 1st. As far as checking with the state, we haven't submitted anything yet to the state, but as far as checking with the state, Mr. Greenfelder checked with them on the methodology to allocate funds for academic intervention, and he can speak to that further. But that was what was referred to earlier, that we checked with the state.
Yeah, but as I was sharing that, we've got to get better about pulling the related documents. And so for the public, if they're tuning into our work session, not only are we looking for the documents, they're going to look for the documents. So we need to, even if it got given at another point in time in another way, when we come to sit and discuss it, we need to have those documents all in one place.
There were just 3 or 4 items that were requested at that board meeting. One of them, a fiscal year listing, as well as a small description. And so I just sent it out via email. We didn't post it to board docs. We didn't post it to the website. It was just an email that I sent to the school board.
Right, and I appreciate, I'll look forward to seeing it, but the timing, I mean, and the time that you all put into it, it's then valuable for us to actually see it.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. All right, next on our chart is Ms. Omesh, and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. After the discussion from today and the conversation from July, is it at all possible to take a look at the needs when it comes to English learners and to perhaps add some kind of line item related to that?
Sure, it's possible. Yes, it's possible. I mean, it would probably come from that summer school amount. And you're talking about something that would be targeted just for EL, either centrally or in schools. Anything is possible. It's whether there's, board consensus around it. I mean, I know you and I were just having our offline conversation that part of what I do plan to, because I know part of your advocacy is, where's the EL funding? We did a big chunk for special ed for those teacher contracts.
And for our Title I schools, I mean, I don't want to pit groups against each other. I want to be very explicit from, everyone here. When we started this pandemic, we identified 3 groups that were particularly at risk from the state level all the way here because of COVID. We're addressing gaps. School-based money is going to go to those things, but division-wide, we've addressed 2 of the 3 needs. This is an opportunity for us to invest in that 3rd bucket.
It's certainly feedback I can go back and talk with the team about between now and Thursday if there's more centralized support we need for English language learners beyond the dollars that will go to schools, and we ensure that schools with high EL populations and data that says there's need, which most schools have needs, they're using it for direct student supports to those kids. So
Outside of just the school-based.
Yeah, can
Go
I
ahead.
Sure,
interject?
Dr. Williams.
Yeah, because this actually is relevant even to the structured literacy piece. Because we're talking about ESSER, there are different things that are planned at the division level that are not included here. So there is division-wide work for our Ls, and I'm sure Noel can give us more detail about where that is funded, but that conversation and that work started, it preceded our being apportioned these resources. So that is underway, and certainly we can take a look at that. The other piece of this that I would just lift up as an example is that Title I schools have resources to do additional things that we're not discussing as we're having conversations about these funds. So it would probably be advantageous if there's a way for us to, at some level, take a look at all of the resources that might be going into an individual school so that you have a whole picture of the resources that they are using to do what or when. There.
Yeah.
The good news is our Title I allocation looks to be higher, and there is something, even when we had our sideline, that I just got corrected about, that I should have known, so my apologies. When we went back to work on the formula from July, and we did put English language into the formula along with SPED and FRM. I just wanted to call your attention. We did put it in the chart. I forgot when I said that to you, when you were asking what did we do. ESOL is in the formula now for the distribution of dollars to the schools. That doesn't mean that schools would spend the money. We've got to do the oversight that they're going to spend the money on the groups that have the academic or social emotional need. But I did want to say that it was baked or put into the formula. We worked with Matt Noren, who's the guru over there in HR, to add in those elements to the formula. Huh? Oof.
Financial services.
Long day, yeah, I know. He's in finance. We're not moving him, I promise, though. Sean's smiling over there.
I think the difference, though, is we're talking about the school-based, which is great, and there's a reason why that Title I money is allocated. That should be used for those needs, right? Division-wide, we've addressed the needs for 2 of the 3 risk groups. That's kind of what I'm asking about, is the division-wide allocation. centralized one, allocation.
Jump in on. Again, I think that one of the things that would be helpful to this conversation, and I don't know if we have time in how we planned our discussions to sort of look at the whole picture, but it is to see the other resources that we have set aside that look at aspects that look like they're missing here. Because there are two things, and Dr. Brabrand just alluded to it. There's a question of how the schools take the money to support specific student groups and needs within their building, how they use their data responsibly. But there's also the division level response around issues of structural inequity that is happening that you don't necessarily see or in this conversation, per se.
Exactly. That's the piece I think we covered for certain groups, but not English learners. And it's a gaping hole. I mentioned this in July. So I would really appreciate if before Thursday, I mean, something could be reflected. My final question, given my time, is, okay, so this is what we have right now. I would ask Dr. Williams, what equity problems can we anticipate exacerbating, from our choices here, either with what's there or what's not there, and especially with the current monitoring processes, I mean, what do we anticipate?
That's a pretty nuanced question, so I'm going to try to, again, sort of lift up the ways in which I tend to think about these things. I mean, again, there are data that are coming out that talk about students losing up to 10 months of math instruction. I mean, some of these things are pretty startling. And what they are talking about most often is the Matthew effect, right? Those who had the least are the ones who were going to lose the most, right? And if that holds true, then what we should be very concerned about are the students who we were very concerned about before this pandemic hit. Then there are going to be other issues that are going to be exacerbated by some things that are out of our sphere of ability to control. So for example, schools that are more compact, more dense with students and have less access to space, those schools are going to likely experience more interruptive types of things happening than schools that are more spacious. And so those, again, those will be out of our ability to control in the way of keeping students in school. And then there is also, the disproportionality in students and families who have medical issues and the impacts that they will experience. So I think the most succinct way I can respond to this is the ways in which we understand structural inequalities in a traditional sense. We should be braced to respond, but we have to be open to the specific impacts that COVID is sort of elevating. And that is where it's going to push our organization to be responsive and adaptive as we respond to conditions that change.
Yeah, I would urge for that to be a conversation with leadership. That piece exactly, the structural disproportionality, is what my heart breaks to not see reflected in some of our choices with money. But thank you.
All right. Please move the questions up. That's it. Okay. So there were a couple other individuals who wanted to ask their questions because they didn't have questions asked, and that will start with Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
Thank you. Yeah, we took a break before I think a couple of us were able to speak, so I appreciate the time. Thank you, Ms. Janet Koufax, and thank you to staff for staying this late and being so patient with all of our questions. It's very appreciated. I know it's been a long day. A couple questions. Many of my questions have been asked, and I'm not going to repeat them, and one of my first questions, we mentioned about the bus driver scale, and Dr. Brabrand, I think you mentioned looking at a long-term solution versus a short-term solution, and I appreciate that. My question would be, so what do we do in the short term? We have a bus driver shortage. We have drivers who are going to other districts. What's the short-term plan?
Yeah, the short-term plan, Thursday you vote and we raise the floor. The short, not too short, but in a few months plan, review the scale and bring suggestions that you could act on immediately, or at least to some part of whatever we do when we do the market analysis. Marty said already, we think we can finish in the next month or two, get it to you before the end of the calendar year. And I'm not saying to wait a year, that we may be able to operate for the rest of this year using some reallocated money and then have it in my budget in January for later years permanently in. Let me say this. This is back to a question, Abrar, that you asked to Dr. Williams about kids and equity. I believe our labor market is fundamentally restructuring before our eyes right now. And I think we're going to really have to relook in this coming budget about wages and salaries for all of our employees. We're in a moment, it's happening real time. It just, bus drivers, it's just happened, a wave went across this country, and the same old is not gonna be the case again. We lived with it, we knew it like before, like Dr. Williams said with kids, and now we're gonna have to do something different because, and Mr. Smith, did you wanna add something to that?
No, I just wanted to add that we'll have to level set our expectations as we think about additional positions for monitors and even lunch monitors. While we think that it's a good fix or might help solve things that are happening in schools, the reality is it's very difficult to find individuals to come into work for an hour a day or 2 hours a day, given our current salary structure. So those are just pieces that I want the board to be aware of as we come back with reports on how well we're doing with the hiring, because we are faced daily with this reality of the lack of qualified employees for positions.
I'm just going to put out there that there's a 80% unemployment rate for people with autism. It's a really great pool. It's a really great training for people with autism, our disability students in our Polly Davis STEP programs. Just putting that out there. Next question, about monitors. I think it'd be great if we use some of those monitors for floating subs and IAs as well, or at least give our principals the ability to use that if they need to. Just putting that out there. I wanted to ask a little bit about, as you're looking on like slide 22-ish around our academic and wellness spending guidelines, and also on what assessments we're looking at, I don't see anything about IEP goals and IEP data in any of these slides anywhere. Dr. Boyd?
Take my glasses off and keep
And
my
you knew I was
mask
going to
on.
ask that, right?
I did, and it's on the bottom of the slide that talks about academic data, the slide that I'll look over Evangeline's piece on slide page number 30, thank you.
Thank you.
Where references IEP goals. We try to fit a lot on the slide to reduce the slides, but that is one indicator. And while it's there, it's also just one of the data points there, but also is something that folks will look at as we look at the wellness piece. So these data points are certainly illustrative, but not exhaustive, but absolutely, those are data points and resources folks will be looking at and making decisions.
Great, thank you. And I just wanted to bring back up the point I made about IEP goals pre-pandemic and post-pandemic and progress reports and looking at all that data, especially for the wellness piece of it and also for long-term outcomes.
Absolutely.
The other question I had along that same lines, or when you're talking about wellness, I noticed you talk about morning meeting and advisory, but what about things that we know at secondary are really important and even elementary for connections? Those are activities, extracurriculars, co-curriculars. What's the funding for that? I've heard some schools are not providing sort of targeted PPE for those schools, you know, singer's masks, band masks. What's the guidance around those things?
Thank you, and also a great question. So as schools develop their intervention plans, their ESSER-SIP plans, some folks will include things that incorporate explicit social emotional learning instruction. So some folks may be using step 2 as a curriculum for social emotional learning, mindfulness, things like that. Some schools may also be doing things to just say, what are some additional activities that we can do to build authentic connections between students and staff? We know that trusted adult piece was an area of need. So I always use the fun student-staff games or 9th grade, 10th grade wars, ways that the staff can see folks as people, that you go to the grocery store too, you go to the community things too. So those are all activities that can certainly be added into schools' plans. But again, I know it's not enough detail now, but each school, based on their own data and what their needs of their students are, will do that a little bit differently. But that's certainly within the purview.
I guess what I'm asking is not so much what's in the purview, but what direction are we giving in terms of helping our schools make the connections between the importance of activities, extracurriculars, co-curriculars, performing arts, all of these classes, and those students having those authentic experiences to build those connections. I've heard from a lot of students saying advisory is fine, but that's not really what gets me to school, right? So what are we doing to give that guidance and that expectation that those will be included in the school improvement plans as part of that wellness overall goal, especially around ESSER funds, especially as to what's happened in performing arts this last year? So that's what I want to know.
Sure, and that would be, again, as we work individually with the coaching and the support for, oh, I'm sorry, Noah, you have your hand up, with principals, and so I'll leave it there in case Noah wants to weigh in. But again, we will be helping because, again, this is increased focus on SEL, and we know that that's a different term. There's a lot of support, and schools are used to doing those intervention and academic plans, but we know that this SEL will require some additional coaching and support from DSS, from ISD, et cetera.
Ms. Klemenko?
I just wanted to add that we certainly want, sorry, I didn't turn my camera on. We certainly want to return to a strong Tier 1 fine arts program being available to all students, and we are working with financial services to get all the masks that are possibly needed for instruments and chorus, et cetera, so that we can have those programs up and running safely. We're returning to field trips at our elementary field trips for fine arts, which I think will be a great boost. And then some of the funds could be allocated for some special after-school programming and things like that to maybe use the fine arts or other things for Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions. But I hear you being more direct with some specific examples of things that schools should consider to help them make connections and connect the dots, I think would be really helpful. So I appreciate that comment.
One thing, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, that I know you advocated, and we did, we held harmless all of our secondary schools that were looking at losing their fine arts staffing because kids last spring. And so, Ms. Klemenko, perhaps at one of our future cabinet or leadership team meetings, we can talk about kids that we may want to intentionally now redirect back into the program where we have the supports in place, we've reassured, and maybe that's going to come now, maybe it's going to come in December when the vaccination is available all the way down to 5 and people are willing to rethink about elementary bands, strings. So we'll work on that, but I think that's part. I do think the future, again, no one has the crystal ball right now, but I think we're going to be starting to talk about, we've had a world-class extra and co-curricular program for kids. How does that become almost universal? Kids, before that was a great thing that we did, and many kids did it, but not all. And now that may be the bridge that many, many of our kids are going to need to walk across and get reconnected. So I think it's thinking about it. Mark, did you want to add something else to that?
Yeah, just one quick additional thing, and I would start out with a thank you to the board. You all approved the assistant DSA position at the secondary schools to go to a 1.0, and that was an enormous step and something that we've been advocating for many years, since back when I was a high school principal, and we're grateful for that support. And that position, along with some additional funding that is part of the ESSER plan, will go to helping to expand some of those opportunities for after-school activities for our high school students and our secondary students. And we will make sure that happens, and we will, as we ramp that up and we're gaining some traction there, we will be more explicit. And they understand that is part of getting that extra position is to help expand those activities. So we will do that, and I know the high school principals were grateful to this board's support for that.
I'm just going to make 2 quick points, and that's the end of my time. But I just want to say very quickly, one, I appreciate the hold harmless. We may want to check on schools to see whether they're actually using those teachers for arts or using them for something else, because I don't like that's consistent across the county.
We'll double check, but I know Dr. Ivy, she may not be raising her hand now. We made it crystal clear what our expectation was, and if we
I will
find that
just
that's
let
not
you-
the case, we will follow up appropriately.
Just double check.
No, thank you.
And the other piece I want to make is I think it's just beyond arts, but like, how do we think about STEM, robotics, esports, all of these things that really are the reason kids want to go to school? And that's my final point, on being intentional and direct about that as part of our wellness. So thank you.
Just super quick, we are launching esports this school year. I know it's not happening on day one, but Mark, maybe a little bit, we are going to have a full lunch, and we are going to be the esports champions of the world in Fairfax County Public Schools.
Second semester, it's rocking and rolling. We are in the process of hiring a person in Mr. Curran's office to help with that, and working very collaboratively with Mr. Sethi and his team to make sure that it's going to be a robust program, and we're going to be rocking.
Ms. Corbett
Very
Sanders
excited.
just wanted a brief, and I know it's late. Can you just give maybe a 30-second what esports is? It's not football, it's not soccer. What is it, Mark?
If you got gamers in your house, you know what esports is. It's basically
online gaming.
It's an online gaming, and they have all kind of a variety of sports that kids compete in. And it is, for a lot of those students, that's their passion, and that's how they identify. And it's actually a great social network, even though it's electronic. College is giving scholarships for it now. It's a pretty amazing, and there's many of our surrounding counties have it, and yeah, and they make a lot of money. The YouTubers where you actually sit and watch somebody playing a game, which is a little strange to me, but it'll be great, and we're excited for it.
All right, guys, Ms. Tolan, and then I'll speak.
Thanks. Just a few points of clarification. We've talked about a number of things that are important to me over and over. On the monitors, I just wanted to say, I was envisioning that to be more like a couple like positions, whether it's a IA, a monitor, somebody that's in the school all day long, not just an hour here or there. So I would like that to be, looked at that way, so that person could be used in a number of different ways. I have to just put this plug in for a very conscious look at class sizes in various different locations. It is a mitigation measure, which falls under ESSER. So it wouldn't necessarily be a long-term thing or a change to how we're looking at class size, but it is a mitigation measure. So I just want to make that clear. I also am very interested to see within our budget process over the next year, as Corbett Sanders brought up, this quarterly update or some periodic update. Definitely support that, and we'll look forward to seeing how we can organize that with the data that we get available. I wanted to ask about the advisories and how we are looking for input from our students as to what is useful for them, what's helpful for them, what kind of lessons they really want to see. So that might be my one thing where I could use a little staff input on how we're going to gather that information.
Sure. We want to work very closely with the students. Our student representative, I have a meeting scheduled with him, I want to say sometime this week, if not this week, next week. Because if you remember, I think in our earlier session, he had some very good ideas about what that might be like, and to use him as one voice and to access other voices about what might be appropriate. As I'm sure our principals and schools welcome the idea from students. When we stand things up and it takes a lot of work, and so you want it to be something that is going to be well received by the end user. And so that's some of the things that we have immediately set up for those purposes.
Okay, great, thanks. I will offer too, we have a pretty good program with Drainsville students from all of our high schools. So if you want to talk to students, it can really help you with that. And then I just wanted to say again around the outdoor spaces, it's two pieces in my mind. It's just the space to be used for lunch or whatever. But we do have, and Noelle can maybe weigh in on this a little bit more, we do have a lot of resources available. Many of our science lessons over the years have purposely been written to be done outside. A very large number of our library of PBL that if we have an ISD are things that can be done outside. So I already talked with Mr. Greenfelder about his science resource teachers or the resource teachers that he has in school support. How can they help our teachers to do these lessons outside, especially now with the weather being as nice as it is? There's no reason to not do that, or just take kids out to read or whatever, so that they are getting that safe space and the SEL enhancements that we talked about, and the additional lessons. So those really were my main points, clarification, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you.
Tolan. I appreciate it. So thank you all for being here today. This has been very long and a little disjointed, but we really appreciate you plugging through this with us and answering all of our questions. I do just want to say, since I haven't spoken about this at all, the spaces that I'm strongly in support of are the outdoor spaces on the monitors. I will speak, and maybe I don't know, but one of the things that I felt, Dr. Brabrand, that I was interested in was the elementary school after school programming in science and math in some of our schools that are underfunded by PTAs. And then when you talk about, esports coming, is that something that we can do for our elementary schools? Robotics, STEM, acting, whatever, STEAM. There are schools that are completely just reliant
on PTA funds, and some of those are our most in-need schools. And if we don't have active PTAs in those schools, they're not getting what other schools are getting. And I've always told you, that's the problem in the TJ pipeline.
I think as we're reviewing those ESSER plans, we can look at those kinds of activities as the schools submit their ESSER plans at the end of next month.
Okay, because
Absolutely.
I would hope and encourage, people that we look at that, because that is a missing piece. That's something that I spoke about earlier when at our earlier meeting. I think that's important. And as I spoke to, Mr. Smith, Mr. Greenfelder at the break, I think the way I said it, just show your work. I think this will happen and this is coming, and I think that was the frustration at the earlier part of our conversation. But, what is going on at each school? Having the RAS sit down with the board members that want that kind of granularity, I'm hoping, Dr. Brayran, we can encourage that and expect that as part of the RAS responsibility and the EPs. It's because that is the way we are, as board members, are going to understand what our kids in the areas that we represent are getting. I know that's a bigger lift for the at-larges, but for those of us who are district members, that's what I would like to see. I think that's important. Ms. Omesh, I appreciate your advocacy for the ELLs. I do want to see the overall plans and processes, because I think that's extremely important. What does that look like in totality? Because we made enhancements in our budget, on what we're going, our annual budget. And how does that, can you crosswalk that for us? That would be important for us to understand the ELL programming, because that's something that I have constantly looked at, wanted to enhance, and do want us to move forward on that. So I think that is all that I have, and most importantly, bringing to the board, the court, if you think that that's an easy lift, you said, very supportive of that. The quarterly updates, yes, the updates, that's extremely important. So yes, you have, and this is your third, my friend. So okay. Let me go to Ms. Keys-Gamarra, who has 2 minutes allocated still.
Okay, so I want to start with one thing that isn't on here, and I've received some advocacy from the community regarding how we teach Braille, and I don't know if this can be included, because the language apparently that we use is not accepted in a number of places, and they feel, especially with military students, that they are handicapped. And so I'm wondering if there is any way that that can be considered. So I'll throw that out there. On page 19, you give a breakdown of how you, kind of a formula, how you make factors determining academic need. And then later you mention a stipend. I think the board should be advised as to how we are identifying those schools that have been particularly hit. I think there's going to be a median, right, where all students have been impacted, but then there are going to be those that are highly impacted. It may be because they're students who are taking care of siblings or other reasons, or because it's all these combinations. I think the board needs to be needs to know how we're dealing with those and what that stipend would look like, so that hopefully it will be a boost, sort of like a booster shot, to kind of bring them up higher, because we know they have further to go. And then the last comment I want to make is from page 21, where we identify how we're going to have the total wellness allocation. I noticed for alternative schools, it's fairly low, and since they have tend to have a lower population, I'm wondering how we might try to make sure we achieve equity in that situation.
We've made sure all of them are taken care of. We've met with each one of those principals, and they'll get a separate allocation out of our office to make sure that they're getting what they need. So we've actually met with each individual principal to make sure they're getting that.
So I appreciate that comment. However, I think the board needs to know how they're being taken care of. I appreciate your reassurances. But perhaps we can make that part of the reporting.
We can do that. We can give some
absolutely.
information about that. Yes.
And I was just also going to add too, with the discussion on today, to look at weighted allocations. That may also have a significant impact on some of our non-traditional schools whose students, by virtue of enrollment in those programs, have some additional factors that would be influenced by that allocation. So I think that that will change what's there. So we'll have an update for you.
And Ms. Corbett Sanders, 2 seconds.
This has nothing to do with ESSER funds. It has to do with the impact of refugees coming to this area as a result of what's happening in Afghanistan. And it would be helpful at a future date to have an update on how we can support those kids and those families, especially because we know they will be concentrated in certain schools. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all for your attendance, your time, and your hard work. Much appreciated. This work session is over.